So, so you think you can tell heaven from hell, blue skies from pain. Can you tell a green field from a cold steel rail? Smile from a veil. Do you think you can tell? Did they get you to play your heroes and ghosts? Hard as you. How we doing, Terrence Puncher? Good morning. Happy
I
Monday.
come here for the
Morning.
tunes, Dark.
Is there a better tune that's ever been made than Wish You Were Here? I don't know.
That's a good one. That's
It's
a good
pretty
one.
amazing. Yeah.
Truly amazing. So what's going on? How you doing, Matt? Good to see you.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, sir. Well, we got a lot to talk about. Kind of another crazy weekend. Of course, the most important event of the weekend was sovereignty trumping journalism in a close down the stretch race at Churchill Downs. I hope everybody had a little bit of money on sovereignty. As we know, journalism is in the tank, and I thought it was a no-brainer. Anybody else get some money on sovereignty?
I wish. I wish.
I just had $5, but I'm not a gambler. But that did the trick, man. I was pretty excited. I was screaming at the TV.
Hey, not the kind of guy to say I told you so, but my awesome governor down here who was illegitimately, quote unquote, elected, sure as shit vetoed the Bitcoin bill in Arizona. And I just want to say that she just ensured her defeat. She kicked the hornet's nest. And curious to see who she's taking orders from, but she got in to office, if people don't know the story, as Secretary of State. She ran for governor. Now, Secretary of State, in her role as Secretary of State, she runs election day operations. So, in an election where she was the candidate, she did not recuse herself. And there were just unbelievable amounts of election day integrity issues, boxes of ballots being taken to her office, uh, red counties and red precincts were had all manner of issues, mine included. One of which was the paper didn't fit into the 3 vote counting machines, that 2 of which were broken. So people waited in line for hours on end, only to have their votes misfeed and being told you got to go back to the back of the line and start over again. So I mean, if you're a if you're a guy or gal who works, you're not doing that. So it's just awful, like right in your face cheating. And she needs to go, and she needs to be behind bars. She is a bad actor.
Speaking about behind bars, Puncher, maybe we can get her in Alcatraz.
Yeah,
Trump talking about reopening Alcatraz. Nancy Pelosi having a shit fit. Um,
I know.
I don't really think he's serious about opening Alcatraz, but I do think it's an awesome Monday morning troll. I mean, I'm not sure you can come up with a better one to set Democrats' hair on fire.
I heard somebody saying how ridiculous it was to open Alcatraz because they have an Iron Man in which people can actually swim
Yeah.
across that gap. So therefore, people can escape from Alcatraz. Therefore, we shouldn't open Alcatraz.
Well, the
If
real
you're
reason,
if you happen to be a
yeah, no,
triathlete,
the real reason not to open Alcatraz is it's just an extremely expensive prison to run and to manage. I think, given our technology now, I think we can do it on land instead of a small little island in the middle of the harbor. But what an amazing troll! I mean, if you really want to set the Democrats on fire, tell them you're going to take their little national park thing and turn it back into a prison. That's just enough to absolutely set them on fire.
the funny part is Democrats being concerned about how expensive it
Yeah,
would
I
be.
know.
Like that matters to them ever.
Funny, funny.
Hey, Puncher, if the governor of Arizona, Katie Hobbs, had not vetoed that bill, because I wasn't paying attention, what would that have meant? Like, what changes would have happened if she didn't veto that?
Well, beyond just the optics of it, that a U.S. state has opted into creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Like any other state and municipalities around it, which I think which was what it would have led to, municipalities and townships and everything else doing the same thing. I mean, we got real problems in issuing bonds and people being interested in like municipal bonds, for example, which build out the infrastructure of our society. Um, I mean, I don't know. Are you interested in buying a 3% muni to build a new sewer system? I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, I totally
Um,
agree with you on the optics for sure. That would have been monumental and amazing. But I was just wondering if, with her position, even if she didn't veto it, if there really would have been any stacking of Bitcoin, at the state level, because of her. Um,
well, yeah, whatever. She's a temporary. I mean, she's a mist that rises up and then settles back down again in the scope of time. Um, I don't know what the mechanics of it are, but I mean, I think a lot of that stuff gets handled at lower levels. Say the treasurer, for example, would be up to them, and I think the treasurer is a Republican, a conservative. So look, I don't know the mechanics of it, other than it would have been great for us to have that. It would have, I think, started some FOMO across other states, and we always thought that states might be the spot where it starts first. So she's an idiot, and she's a hack, and she's a non-thinker, and she's taking her orders from elsewhere. I'd like to know who she's taking her orders from, because even in her small statement where she's claimed, the reason for veto is because it's an untested asset. I mean, really?
Yeah, an
She's
untested investment after 16 years of the best performing thing we've ever had in our lifetime.
right. So it's absurd. The whole thing's absurd. She's illegitimate, and I hope she's gone soon because she belongs in a pink jumpsuit at Joe Arpaio's prison. That's where
Yeah,
she
I'll
belongs.
just throw in there that I think it came out that Arizona's state pension fund owns MicroStrategy, another untested asset.
Go figure that.
The importance of states acquiring Bitcoin comes back to bit bonds, right? Like the hardest thing going forward for states is they're going to be competing with the federal government to issue municipal securities, right? To do that water project, to do that garbage project, the road project, whatever it is, right? Like municipal bonds are obviously tax free to the state residents. Um, for local residents, they're triple tax free. Now, that's important. That gives them the ability to compete with the federal government. But when the federal government is selling and refinancing, what, $9 trillion this year, all of the states, all of the municipalities have to compete with the federal government, right, for those dollars. And it's going to get harder at higher rates. It's going to be more expensive because you got to think of the federal government as a tremendous competitor when it's looking for investment. By the way, it doesn't just hurt states; hurts private companies, it hurts small business, hurts the entire world, right? Because investment is going into the U.S. government instead of into the private sector. So just to keep in mind that this is another really, really good argument for bit bonds, especially on the local and state level.
I'm not sure. They passed the House and Senate in pretty convincing fashion. I don't know what the threshold is to override a veto. I'm just not that involved in state politics here as a new transplant here, relatively new transplant to Arizona. But maybe they can overturn her veto. I don't know if they have the political will for it or what the machinations there are. But yeah, it's a missed opportunity for sure.
Hey, Dark, are you down on your Cantor Fitzgerald investment?
No, I don't trade SPACs. I learned my lesson about 25 years ago, 20 years ago, trading a SPAC. Um, so until this thing is funded and we understand what the construction is and who owns what, it's just like trading. It's just gambling. It's literally gambling. So I don't touch SPACs. Now, at the point when it becomes capitalized, we know how much Bitcoin it holds and who owns what and what the capitalization table looks like, what the waterfall looks like. At that point, we can do real analysis and try to put a valuation on it. But right now, it's just literally gambling.
Yeah, that's what I figured. If it wasn't for the Bitcoin component, I wouldn't have even known about it or cared about it. But it's just interesting to see how much it rose, much, much higher than I thought it would. But it looks like it's now coming a little bit back down to earth. I see we've got Josh up on stage now as well.
How you doing,
Hey,
Josh?
Josh.
Oh, hey guys, how are you?
Good, man. I don't think we've ever been on a space together. How you doing, man?
I'm hanging in there. Sorry, I have mute problems. I'm hanging in there. How are you doing?
Doing good, man. It's really nice to have you up here.
Thank you.
Matt, what's going on with you, brother? What are you looking at?
Just waiting to see some updates from a couple of my friends who are having some Bitcoin conversations. A couple family offices that I shook my tin cup at a long time ago came back to me and asked me some follow-up questions, and I'm not nerdy enough on some of these things, so I pawn them off to create some experts. And so I'm waiting to hear back on those calls. But yeah, I love adoption. I love when people who heard about Bitcoin 4 and 5 years ago are coming back because it means the long game works too.
Absolutely. Absolutely, sir. What's on your mind, Terrence? What are you thinking about?
Well, I saw that Jesse Myers. He has his famous 900 trillion global chart that Michael Saylor has also popularized. Which is also helpful to see all the different buckets and how Bitcoin will hopefully eventually be swallowing a lot of those melting ice cubes. But he just posted today that we've now reached 1,000 trillion or 1 quadrillion. So we're now using the term quadrillion. We're now at 1 quadrillion in global wealth. Bitcoin's sitting at 2 trillion of that. So we're still at only 0.2%, which just shows what the opportunity is and how many people just still haven't unplugged and woken up. I just put it in the nest. It's just baffling to think about because to us it's everything, but it just shows how little of the world even knows.
And that's like semi-materialized wealth. We of course have monetary premium, which is AKA fake because we printed too much money. So, okay, fine, the score goes down slightly, but then there's derivatives and all sorts of offsetting bets, supposedly offsetting bets. So yeah, it's so true that maybe the global total asset value is around $1 trillion, but the global value of all of the economic energy is probably 50 or 100 times that size.
For those who don't know or are hearing Matt for the first time, they don't know this, but back in elementary school, he was sick. He had the measles during the day where they taught periods. So his sentences just go. He just starts talking and it just goes. It's just one long like there's no stop signs in his words. Just nothing wrong with that, but I'm just letting you guys know he doesn't have a disease.
Yeah, and he breathes somehow, right? Like you don't ever hear the breath, which is just amazing, right? Matt, how do you do that?
I used to sing concert choir, so I've got a really big diaphragm, and I can just keep slowly pushing air out at a very low pace until I'm finished doing everything I need to.
That's awesome.
Hey, this isn't a diaphragm measuring contest, Matt. Okay, let's just keep it.
Hey Josh, since we got you up here, I noticed some back and forth with you and maybe some consternation with how Saylor is issuing his financial products. Got any thoughts on that, and what your latest thoughts are on how Saylor's running MicroStrategy?
Well, I want to talk about contingency planning, and I want to talk about what happens if you go down to a lower level, because when we're running here and selling ATMs pretty strong, at 2.5 or so MNAV, I can foresee a situation where we go back down to 84 and you're sub 1 MNAV. I mean, and sub 1 MNAV can happen just because of flows. That's all there is to it. If people say, no, there's no way it's an arbitrage, but there's no arbitrage. So I just want to ask the question: do you have a thought about that, Michael? Does the team have a plan for what they would do if you go sub 1? Because if you go sub 1, then what happens is he's now starting to sort of sell his ATM at maybe 1.25 because he sold it for 1.5, and then what happens is that anybody else who wants to sell has to go and sell at 3/4 or 0.8. It just starts to kind of steamroll. So it's a good idea to have a conversation like Warren Buffett always has about what price he would, or what mechanism and what price he would buy back shares. And Michael's always kind of had a reticent attitude about buying back shares, decapitalizing. But it's something you're supposed to do when your asset is basically holding the best asset in the world. It becomes the best asset in the world, and you have to be willing to play the arbitrage. So that's the conversation I want to have. That's all.
Yeah, no, it's a really valid point. So what Josh is saying is that if the MNAV, if the price to book were to drop below 1 just due to flows, due to
Yeah.
market conditions, then one would make the argument that the best move, the fiduciary responsibility of the company, would be to sell Bitcoin and buy back common shares, right? And wait for the price to book to go back above 1, at which point they could sell stock and buy Bitcoin. And I think that's a really valid point. I don't know, it's interesting that you bring it up, Josh, because this kind of crosses the line into, well, what's smart, what's intelligent, into fiduciary responsibility of a Bitcoin treasury company, right? I
Right.
think I
And I
think
think
that,
there's something to be said for like showing the robustness of Bitcoin by actually allowing some small sale, once in a while to take place to show. But this never sell Bitcoin thing kind of scares people a little bit. Like, what does that mean? Are you afraid to sell Bitcoin? Like it's going to cause a cascade? And I think it needs to be more robust. It needs to be more anti-fragile than that. That's all.
and I think that's a valid point. I've kind of thought for a while that it makes the most sense to me for Saylor to do some type of bit bond, right? And actually raise fiat and get into a fiat business like a reinsurance, like a la Warren Buffett. Um, I saw what's his name from Pershing Square, Ackman. Ackman was on
Yeah.
TV this morning, and he said he's launching. He put a major investment into Howard Hughes, which is a real estate empire, like real estate holding company. They own a good bound of real estate in Vegas, and he's come in with a $900 million investment, and they're looking to start their own insurance company. Super
Yeah.
interesting. But this is to this point, the smartest guys in the world realize that it makes sense to have an operating business, a good operating business. And if you have access to hundreds of billions of dollars in capital, which Saylor does, right? He could take
Yeah.
his Bitcoin, he could borrow against it at ridiculous rates, and he could start an operating business, right? Now, to me, that seems like a no-brainer, and that would protect the price to book because you have an operating company, you have profits. And in the end,
Yeah.
while everyone wants to think of MicroStrategy as a Bitcoin company, it's really not, right? It's a US dollar company, it's a fiat company that's holding Bitcoin, but you don't, the investors, the bondholders, the preferred holders, they don't own Bitcoin, right? They have a US dollar investment in a US dollar company. So, hey, Josh, I think you're making some really valid points. What's your thought about him actually starting an operating company with his pristine collateral?
Well, I would love that. Listen, we need to have a private label, non-government issued stablecoin. And one thing you could do with Bitcoin is you could way over collateralize because he has so much, and just start issuing something that is a Bitcoin backed stablecoin. And it would look like this in my mind. You have this. You ever seen the power law curve? The bottom price, which is such a low price, always one we've never delved through, would be the deadest support you would have. And so if you took every Bitcoin and only allocated printed cash or whatever stablecoin you want to do, using the value of the bottom line, which is like probably 20%, then you would have an 80% haircut, and that balance that above it would be considered the residual, and that would be the most high volatile piece of Bitcoin you can have, which is the piece that's above the bottom line. And though that small piece of 25% or so of Bitcoin that would be below the bottom line, which that price which is probably like $30,000 right now, that would be the amount of cash you would be willing to issue on a stable coin. And he could do so much. Just look at this, how much he has. He could do so much of a stable coin that would be safe at that point. It was kind of what Luna was trying to do. They just got done too late. Once he saw, Do Kwon saw there was a problem, and he saw the death spiral could take place, he started to try to do this, but he just wasn't fast enough. And I think it would be a great opportunity. That's all. I mean,
So are you
private label stablecoin. That's great.
Are you thinking the stablecoin is backed by dollars, or a stablecoin that's actually a Bitcoin stablecoin?
A stablecoin is backed by Bitcoin.
But is it a dollar stablecoin or is it a Bitcoin?
Well, now that's another thing. So now you can have a dollar stablecoin like Terra Luna was, or you could have a Satoshi, like a SAT stablecoin. So say, for instance, right now you could say, I want to issue this MSTR stablecoin, and it's worth 100,000 Satoshis, roughly, $1 now per share. And that would be a really cool idea right there. Just start saying, we're going to go into Bitcoin Standard. You want to be with us or not? We'll issue this stablecoin, and it's worth 100,000 Satoshis, and it's backed by Bitcoin. And it would suddenly make people to be able to buy. You just be able to go. Imagine that'd be like a thing that lots of people would buy and give it to their friends or whatever.
Well, not only that, it would trade at extremely, because it's a stable coin, right? You could, just like Tether, you could put it on the Lightning Network, or you could trade it on the other chains, but super fast, kind of solves the whole problem of, well, you can't use it to buy anything, right? All of a sudden you'd have,
Right.
it really does solve a lot of issues. It's super interesting concepts, right? I really,
Would that face political headwinds, Dart? I mean,
look,
isn't having a stable
everything has political headwinds, but it's just super. The point Josh is making, he's being very forward thinking, right? Like he's thinking, you know, 3 moves ahead, like a good chess player, right? And he's saying to himself, well, what happens if this happens? What's the operating business model, right? Now, I've speculated on insurance companies. He's just gone in a different direction and said, hey, why don't you do a stable coin? Use your pristine collateral to issue a stable coin, right? One of the great critics.
But wouldn't that stable coin be just a superior stable coin?
Well,
In my mind,
it just
it would
depends.
be.
It would be a highly volatile stable coin compared to the U.S. dollar, right? So, certain people would really like it because from a medium of exchange standpoint, a Bitcoin medium of exchange, right? You're now creating a super fast kind of derivative of Bitcoin, a one-to-one representation of Bitcoin. It's not without its risks, right? But it certainly is extremely interesting. It's worth having the conversation. I wouldn't shut it down, without putting extensive thought into it.
Yeah, I mean, imagine instead of starting fresh, he's got his stash, 500,000 Bitcoin. Just as an experiment, he starts to sell the stable coin. Then in each share is worth 100,000 Satoshis, which is, like I said, roughly 94 cents right now. So he sells those for $1. He puts the dollar in the bank, and it starts earning interest. So it's still there. It's always there, just like Tether's supposed to have. You can come back when you want to redeem it, and you can get the dollar, or you can get your 100,000 Satoshis, whichever one you want. That's going to be a free option. And all of a sudden, what's going to happen is the stablecoin is going to start to trade at a premium, and it's going to be the best performing asset in the world with low volatility.
Yeah, you get it, Puncher. You see where he's going with that, right?
And meanwhile, you're earning interest on that dollar the whole time.
Yep.
And they don't get that earned interest, though. See,
that's why
as long as they have their dollar with you and they have the stablecoin, that interest is all yours. That becomes your operating income.
Yeah, look, this is. It's no
it.
different than tokenizing gold, right? And selling a token on gold, or tokenizing
your dollars. They'll give you an interest. It's just sitting in the bank account. So your dollar's sitting there. Yeah, he's already got this Bitcoin over here saying, hey, well, if instead you want to trade it in for 100,000 Satoshis, you can do that and walk away once a year. And everyone would buy it because they would say this is free optionality.
But wouldn't my stable coin now have an implied CAGR of whatever Bitcoin's CAGR
sir.
is?
That's the whole point. That's the whole point.
But and when I said political, I guess the current administration is on board with stable coins because ultimately they're backed by U.S. dollars. This is something
Now,
this one would be
not, and now all of a sudden it's
the downside. The
existential
downside
threat.
here is that you're creating more Bitcoin, right? So the stable coin acts as a form of paper Bitcoin. So
you got the Bitcoin already, though. Make sure you understand he's already got the Bitcoin. It's just his attitude is I'm never selling it anyway. Let's just try a sort of a sample program. I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to sell these stable coins that are 100,000 Satoshis I'm gonna sell them for $1, even though they're only worth 94 cents right now. I'm gonna put the cash in the bank. It'll be there right there for you. It's just like Tether supposedly has, and it'll be earning interest for my strategy. In the meantime, at the end of the year, every year, and you get the right to come back and say, well, you know what? I want my $1 back, and I don't get any interest, or I want my 100,000 satoshis, and you give it to them.
Why only at the end of the year? Why not just make it a free
Yeah,
flowing?
you're right. Listen, I'm trying to simplify things. I haven't figured it out.
Yeah, just make it a treasury like Tether. But again,
As Bitcoin goes up, wouldn't the stable coin or the conversion rate
of course,
constantly adjust
yeah,
to
Exactly.
when
That's the
of
you?
course,
beauty of it.
real
Yeah.
time. The
That's the
downside
beauty
is
of
that you're creating a shit ton of paper Bitcoin. So
But you do have you already have the Bitcoin there sitting there, and that's why I
you
like to
do.
have some periodicity in
Yeah,
the
but
exchange.
you're not actually deleting the Bitcoin or in some way permanently offsetting it. So to Scott's point, you are still creating synthetic Bitcoin, even if Saylor does have it locked up.
You're creating an option on some of the Bitcoin that he owns. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true. But it's not actual Bitcoin. It's the option on. It's like, it's hard to say this, but people don't quite get this. A stock does not entitle you to the assets of the company. If you buy MSTR, you do not own the Bitcoin. That's why I don't love this term Bitcoin per share. You have a call option on the assets of the company, and the exercise price is it's the market value of all the debt that you have to pay off. Gotta go.
Yeah, that's 100% true. Right. I mean, I love talking to Josh because as an options guy, and Josh is an options guy too. This is how we look at the world. This is why I've been making the point that the introduction into the TradFi space, the interlacing of Bitcoin into TradFi, was inevitably going to create, let's just call it, 10 million more Bitcoin. Albeit paper Bitcoin representations, options on Bitcoin, it's still 10 million more Bitcoin. So if you're wondering why, with all this great news and all of this amazing, things happening, why is Bitcoin price not exploding? Well, with the creation of the ETFs, the proliferation of futures, the cash settled future on the exchange, an idea like this, right? These all work to suppress price in the short term, right? The good news is, unlike the gold market, right, because of the chain, you really can't create more than another 15 million Bitcoin, right? Once you've done that, you really can't keep rehypothecating it because the chain doesn't lie.
Yeah. Well, ETFs worry me a little bit because they allow for this operational shorting, which means they can literally practically create an unlimited supply of short supply of oversold securities and have long terms of fails to deliver. The laws allows for that in ETF. It's a complicated conversation. We can have it another time if you'd like.
Now you're 100% right again, right? And we've talked about that here on the space.
I catch some of your faces. I usually come on anonymous. I meant to this time. I'm sorry for jumping in.
No, we're happy to have you, Josh.
I see British.
Yeah, I'm
Thrilled,
actually
actually.
thrilled to have
Yeah.
you, Josh. These are the type of conversations I think the audience really enjoys, because they're derivative conversations, and to be quite frank, these are extremely educational to people that really don't understand the TradFi space. Hey, I think we got British up on stage. British, what's going on, brother?
Good evening, gents. All good. Hope you're both well. Yeah, that's an interesting conversation. I think Saylor has a lot of options here of what he can do. I think the first goal, though, has to be how hard and how fast can we acquire as much Bitcoin as possible? Because the more Bitcoin he has, the more of these options he can use.
100%. And that's what he's doing, right? He's not dumb. He's no dummy.
Yeah, the thing that I find interesting, I was thinking about it, it's like, how long until he can take a 0% interest? Like, Josh, you may be able to answer this for me because I was thinking about it, but I don't know. Is there a scenario in the future where people or companies will loan him money at 0% interest rates to do stock buybacks to force the upside volatility on a share price?
Let me think about that. I mean, he can get 0% if he's got an option in there. That's the only way you get a zero coupon bond. Or basically, it's got to have an original issue discount. So zero coupon bonds usually would basically sell for like 80 cents, and you get $100 back at the end of maturity. So that's how that works. It's just an implied interest rate, but you don't pay it along the way. You only pay it on the back end, and that could be done.
Yeah, because obviously the ATMs are adding in downside volatility, right? So it's like the converts can add upside volatility to the share price, but it's inefficient way of doing it through the derivatives markets. So I was just wondering whether it'd be possible for him to borrow some money at 0% for the strict purpose of doing stock buybacks. And then he would really be in control of the
Yeah.
downside and the upside vol on the
Yeah,
asset.
I would say let's talk about this on a Google OID, original issue discount, and you'll see that's how a zero coupon bond normally works.
Okay.
So, guys, I've kind of been speculating lately that we've probably getting close to the end of seeing convertible bonds, and that if I was Saylor, I would simply issue perpetual preferreds that mimic the terms of a convertible bond and take away any kind of downside run risk on the capital and reduce the leverage on the balance sheet. What do you guys think about that?
I think he has to get the MSTR debt classified as investment grade first, and once he does that, it opens up a whole new market. It makes the convertible bond market looks like child's play at that point.
Yes, I
It's a
agree.
good.
He's coming close to exhausting the market for convertible bonds, which is usually just an arbitrage market. And debt is this big problem. See, because I don't know. Usually you start there, and by now, so many years in, you would have a decent debt rating, and he just doesn't. First, because BTC is not considered to be an interest bearing security, so it's hard to understand how's the money going to come in, and his core business has kind of disappeared. Just to be frank, there's not a lot of the core business there, so you have to come up with a way of generating income sufficient to make the debt rating agencies comfortable, and they aren't comfortable because of Silvergate and some other things that took place. I just know that for a fact.
So would they get comfortable if he converted the MicroStrategy into like Dark was saying, a reinsurance company or some operating company with all the
Yeah,
collateral
I think
behind it?
they would get comfortable, which is what he's doing right now. If he it's a little bit deleterious to the stockholder if he basically hammers out a lot more ATM, so he builds up the assets. Sorry, he builds up the assets, and then basically leaves the debt holders benefiting from those assets. People don't like to hear this word, right? But debt analysis is always about bankruptcy analysis and workout analysis. So the idea that there's a whole bunch of assets that aren't really secured to common stock makes the new debt buyer very happy because he's first in line.
Yeah, that's a great point, right? The waterfall on MicroStrategy looks fantastic. I think the biggest issue, and one of the big issues he has, is with the proliferation of MISTY, IMST, MSTY, for those not familiar. You have just so much call selling generically coming into the market that it makes the converts just that much less attractive, right? And they have to sell at a continued discount.
Omar, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm trying to get to try to elaborate on this whole paper Bitcoin talk. I know there's been a lot of talk about that over the last few months, but things have I feel like things have accelerated a little bit over the past few days. Um, I had a conversation last night with Mike Alfred, and what he said basically was that the only way he could see that happen would be through exchanges, but under current conditions and with the current regulatory climate, with who we have in the administration, everything, things might be a little tighter than they used to be back in the days. Um, and I just can't see how that could possibly happen, especially when we know that there's a very simple fact that the price is directly correlated to the asset, which is Bitcoin, and its spot price, which is in turn uh, all about supply and demand. So can someone explain to me, because I just don't get how that would work.
Yeah, so you're thinking of paper Bitcoin as hypothecated Bitcoin that's on the exchange, right? And there is some of that for sure. We're talking about paper Bitcoin as synthetic Bitcoin created in the derivatives market, right? That there's a distinction. As an example, if I borrow a share of IBIT, if I sell 1,000 shares of IBIT short, okay, I've created synthetic Bitcoin. right? That's just a fact, right? There's now 1,000 shares that somebody owns that there is no Bitcoin for, right? That the Bitcoin isn't represented. So it's just like, think of it like a side bet that I have with whoever bought my 1,000 shares that I shorted, but nonetheless, it's a short on Bitcoin, right? And that's true all throughout the derivatives complex.
Okay, so basically what you're referring to is something similar to what's been going on. I mean, 5 years ago with the whole GameStop theory, something similar to that.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, remember, GameStop is a single asset with one derivatives complex. Bitcoin is a full blown complex with all different types of assets. So whether you're talking about MicroStrategy or you're talking about Marathon or you're talking about insert your asset here. The more the more these correlations exist to Bitcoin. As an example, MicroStrategy is correlated to Bitcoin price, right? It's not a one-to-one correlation, but it's correlated. So you're going to have people out there and traders who are looking to buy MicroStrategy and sell Bitcoin short, or buy Bitcoin and sell MicroStrategy short, depending on how they view that correlation. And in doing so, they're just creating synthetic Bitcoin, right? They're not going into the spot market. They're going into the derivatives market.
So what do you think would lead to an implosion where we get to the bottom of it and everyone is caught swimming naked and boom?
No, I think that the good news about Bitcoin, and I'd love to get Josh's feedback on this, but the chain doesn't lie. Okay, so ultimately, I'm not sure that you can create endless Bitcoin, right? I think you can only create, let's call it 10 million additional Bitcoin. And then at that point, people that are going to have a tough time hedging, and you'll see dislocations, right? You'll see the futures price begin to trade below spot, right? You'll see in IBIT, you'll see puts trading above calls, right, to signal sort of a short squeeze because the natural hedge isn't there, right? So the good news here is that there's a limit to how much synthetic Bitcoin can be created. At least I believe there is. I'd love to get Josh and British's perspective on this.
Well, I'm still trying to figure out this thing called perpetual futures. I traded bond futures my whole life, and it was one of my claim to fame was that I linked the two, the real government bond flow to the bond futures in trading, and made, I think, the first delivery Solomon had ever made. This perpetual futures market is just very confusing to me. What is a perpetual contract, one to one, one guy facing another guy? It's really strange because there's no way to get out. There's no natural closure, so that can create a lot of problems. It could theoretically cause an asset to suddenly go to zero and to negative, and because the perpetual futures contract could go to negative because you think that there's a squeeze, there's also a long squeeze, like the guy can't get out, and that can happen with a huge dislocation in the spot market. So I'm not talking about Bitcoin per se, but in theory, that's a possibility with perpetual futures. It bothers me a lot to think about it all the time. So I haven't figured it out yet, Dart.
Yeah, it's a great point, right? Like, not only do we have perpetual futures, but we have cash settled futures, which can be used to very easily.
I hate cash settled futures. I hate
Yeah,
them.
I mean, they're really, and I make this argument all the time. There's really no economic purpose of a cash settled future other than manipulation, right?
And see, look, listen, there was a manipulation plan by 2016 or so. If you look at the high, the blow up high in 2017, I think the absolute high took place on the day that the CME futures complex was announced. It was the day, and it was announced to be the launch 1 year ahead in December 2018. That was like the high, the day they announced it, and then it went down and down and down a ton, and the low was just like the same day that it actually launched in December 2018. Just take a look; it's wild.
Yeah, and it makes sense, right? Because you're creating, that was the introduction, the formal introduction of real paper Bitcoin into what was a scarce, infinitely scarce asset, which is no longer infinitely scarce. But again, I want to kind of come back to this concept of the chain doesn't lie, right? In the end, at some point, these products will dislocate because the spot Bitcoin will continue to go higher, and you'll see the complex of derivatives begin to lose their peg to spot.
Yep.
I fully expect that. I don't know when it happens, but at some point it happens, and then you have a supply crunch. You have the ultimate short squeeze because the chain, like unlike the gold market where you can continue the fraud forever, right? The chain doesn't lie. And ultimately, if 21 million people hold Bitcoin, or let's just say 21 million people hold one Bitcoin, right? Like it's sort of checkmate for the perpetual futures market, and that's the point that Josh is making, right? Like at some point, if you're long a perpetual future, and let's just say that the arbitrageurs have been buying perpetuals and shorting spot against it, well, they get crushed, right? Like that's the long squeeze that you're talking about, where the whole thing just breaks.
And in terms of change doesn't lie, the thing you have to address here is some sort of regulatory underpinning for a punishment for failure to deliver. That's really important. That exists in the primary bond market. If you fail to deliver to the Fed, the Treasury, or the futures complex, they close you down. They literally take away your license, and that's what scares everyone away. You don't fail. But there's massive failures everywhere, and I just wonder sometimes, what if Michael Saylor has agreed to do a trade and they just fail to deliver on the chain? Right? But an hour later, what's he going to do? Well, he's got a deal. The broker says, "Don't worry about it. We're good." But it goes another day. It goes another day. How do we know that they're actually, not failing? I don't know. Failing to deliver just breaks the whole system because the chain's not worth shit then, because you don't know how many trades are built up now. Follow me?
100%, right? Like, I was a market maker on the floor, and failure to deliver was, part of our strategy, especially when trading, highly shorted equities. We had the thing called the wheel, right? And we would just short because we got an exemption, we would just short the stock and then deal with buy-in risk, and then we'd price in buy-in risk. But 100%, I couldn't agree more. Failure to deliver is the biggest risk to the Bitcoin market.
Yeah, we don't know how much on-chain stuff has already been pledged, which is backed up in the log. You know what I mean? The log jam. I just don't know.
No, there's no way that.
Well, does the proliferation of these paper Bitcoin products accelerate the time to dislocation, or does it forestall it?
I mean, it puts it off on a separate line. Let's say, oh, you're over here, and the different checkout line is not the express checkout line. The express checkout line is supposed to be on chain, and you have to get it in there today. But I still wonder what happens if the delivery doesn't take place. The buttons get clicked at whatever Coinbase. They say, okay, but he's good for it. Don't worry, right? But it's just not going to go on chain because there's a little problem, like the power went out or whatever. I don't know. I just don't know.
Well, so that's a good point, right? So we will assume that Coinbase is not having failure to deliver problems. What would be more likely a failure to deliver is Sailor contracts with an OTC desk, let's say Goldman Sachs, buys 20,000 Bitcoin, and
Bingo.
they failure to deliver. That's where
Bingo.
the real.
And Sailor would never talk about that if that happened. That's just, he would go, okay, we're good. That's how that would work.
Yeah, but I think that, see, what I hope, and again I hope, is if Saylor was on the other side of a failure to deliver, the 20,000 Bitcoin doesn't show up, right? The next time he buys Bitcoin, he's going directly to the chain, right? Like to the exchange, because it's just not, at that point it's not worth it for him to take, market risk that he doesn't understand, and
What if he
nobody
trusts
understands.
Goldman? What if he trusts Goldman? And Goldman has deep enough pockets that they can back up and deliver. And basically what he's doing is he's got a pledge an IOU, and he's getting paid for it. Like, we don't know it yet, but he's actually getting, because when you get a failed deliver, you can negotiate and say, well, no, you got to pay me by giving
Yeah,
me an interest rate on this. So you know how that works. It could
sure.
trade tight. It could be trading tight. We wouldn't even know about.
Yeah, by the way, that this is how the short stock market works today in the United States for the audience, right? When you notice a stock is hard to borrow, then you notice that they'll attach a negative interest rate to borrowing that stock. So you're essentially paying for the right to borrow. And that's what Josh is referring to, right? So, is that going on in the spot market today? No. Could it? Yeah. I mean, again, if you saw negative borrow rates on Bitcoin, that would be a wild scenario. I don't know what would happen, but there would be some severe dislocations.
Yeah, well, take a look at the implied rate on perpetuals to get an idea of, and dislocation versus spot. Might get a sense of it. That's what I do.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So that correlation, when it begins to break, you want to put it on Chinese. You want to put it on the inverse way, because once it breaks, I don't know how you stop it. Right, like it just becomes a self fulfilling prophecy that it's going to dislocate and break.
But that doesn't matter for Bitcoin. I mean, if you hold self custody Bitcoin, that's an explosion to the upside, right? The paper markets start dislocating, and there's all kinds of trauma there. But
Yeah, that's where
we're
Bitcoin and
good,
self custody works. But yeah, you could have
right?
a lot of trouble inside of the complex. And especially to Josh's point, if you learn that trusted actors have been doing untrustful things, that becomes a problem for Bitcoin.
How so?
Well,
Say
if you
more about
learned
that.
that Saylor was accepting IOUs and was getting paid some interest rate to accept IOUs, would you begin to sell your MicroStrategy? Right? Would you put MicroStrategy into a tailspin?
So when you say trusted actors, you mean trusted actors in the
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin complex, not
Right.
Goldman
What if what
Sachs,
if you what
who
if
I
you
don't
learned
trust.
that iBit didn't really have the Bitcoin, that they had some massive stack of IOUs and that they were getting paid interest for it, right? Well, would you want to hold iBit? Right? So all
Well, we don't know that, right? There
no,
is no, there
there's
is
and to
no.
Josh's point again,
Oh,
there's no way to
faith.
know. The only way we would ever know is if you start to see the complex begin to break its correlations.
Or when they do convert to the possibility of in-kind Bitcoin.
Yes, that's the key right there. I want that. That's
So
what makes the entire
Yes.
system honest.
Right.
But don't they? Wasn't the story that they wanted that?
there was
I think
there was so much
BlackRock.
talk about it, and then they just stopped
I never
overnight. I'm
believe
not sure
anything that
why.
anyone says because they
Yeah.
sometimes say the other thing than they
Yeah,
mean.
right.
They say the
Believe,
opposite of what they mean. I don't know.
yeah, believe nothing of what you hear and only half of what you see when it comes to Wall Street. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah, they say the same thing at SEER school in the military
it's hard.
when you're going through prisoner of war training.
It's hard to build a hockey stick model with Bitcoin because Bitcoin is backed by physics, and unfortunately, as a Wall Streeter, I can attest to the fact that it's just much easier to make things go up and to the right when it's attached to nothing.
That's a valid point. Very valid point. British, what are you thinking? You absorbing all this?
British is in
Yeah,
love.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
when it comes, yeah, I mean, look, market structures with Bitcoin become a lot easier. But when it comes to like the bond market and stuff like that, I lean over to you guys. That's above my experience grade. Um, but yeah, I think we should move to in kind. I think that would be that. I think that is going to be the smart move, and we'll see how long it takes now that we've got a new admin.
Hey,
Yeah,
British,
well,
I saw your post last night about the revisiting those CME gaps and fill them up. I know you're in love with those CME gaps, bro. So what do you see happening? You think we go back down
Well,
there?
90% of the time they get filled, so I think we are headed down there at 92 on the futures chart.
yeah, well, we're almost there. Just one more day.
Yeah, yeah. I know Bitcoiners like to imagine that those things are not real, but these are vacuums that get created in the markets for liquidity, and most of the time they get filled.
Wait,
If it,
isn't there another one at 87.3, something like that?
let me have a look for you. When was
Price
that?
totally has price totally has memory, British. I mean, ultimately, if it's bounced off a wall a few times before, it's going to remember doing that because the traders are the participants who were there before. And then when it
Yeah,
breaks through, suddenly that wall becomes a nice table, and you can stand on top of that and keep dancing your way up.
yeah. I can't see the one that you're talking about at 87. 3. I don't know where that one is, but yeah, I mean, like I said, it's most of the time. So if the price has moved powerfully up and stayed there for long enough, then you erased, as the previous speaker said, the memory of that price. But generally speaking, 90% of the time you're going to fill it.
Yeah, so it seems like there's one at 84.2 to 85.9, and then 82.5 to 84.1.
What day is that?
Oh, let me take a look. This seems to be March 2025. Late March 2025, 82.5 to 84.1.
I think that's been filled already to the downside. So I'm not really sure what you're looking at. I mean, we've been below that since March. In April, we went down to 75.
Yeah.
And just for clarification, I'm looking at symbol BTC1 number one exclamation mark. That's the Bitcoin CME futures.
I see the same thing.
On the gold and silver ETFs, you could do in kind, but if you tried to do it, there's guys who tried before, like some of the silver guys I used to follow. They tried to do in kind redemptions. It was just a joke. You were buried in an impenetrable veneer of bureaucracy and paperwork, and it just never happened to avoid the default, right? Like the cash settlement. I wonder if that's kind of something that could be constructed for Bitcoin. Like in theory, you could do in kind, but you just get buried in a maze of bureaucracy.
Yeah. Well, I think with Bitcoin, it would have to work, right? Like because there's no vault, there's no, come and we got to we got to bring a truck and we got to move it. So in theory, if you did in kind deposits and withdrawals of the ETFs, that would take off one major kind of paper Bitcoin center, but it doesn't remove the perpetual futures. It doesn't remove the options complexes. It doesn't solve all problems, but it solves some for sure.
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of the bureaucracy was like a facade of logistics, right? Well, how do you actually get the physical gold? There's no such problem with Bitcoin. You press a
Yeah,
button.
well, in order to do real in kind withdrawals and deposits, I imagine they would have to segregate every deposit and withdrawal into a separate wallet so that you actually get back the same Bitcoin you're putting in. I don't know. What do you think, Josh?
So real in-kind withdrawals and such are done only at the AP level with large chunks. Individual investors don't get access to that, but it's good to know that it's doable. But it's done at the AP level for large numbers of shares or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Just like creations and redemptions. But it would be interesting if they opened it up to.
I'll take it.
Go ahead, Punch.
No, I say I'll take it. That's fine. I would love to see it,
What,
even
what,
if
what,
I'm excluded as a retail investor.
what you really want is the ability to do it. Whether you do it or not is not really the question for like retail.
Exactly. It's a
You want
Second
the
Amendment kind of
ability
thing.
to,
It's like you just want to know the guy has a
yeah,
gun. It's a Second Amendment kind of thing.
right.
Jammer, what's going on, man? Been a while since we've talked. How are you doing, brother?
Hey, what's up, Dark Side? I'm good. Thanks for having me up. Great space as always. Had a little bit of time this morning, so figured I'd pop in. Josh, love seeing you up here. Another great mind jamming with the likes of Dark Side Puncher, Matt, British, Omar, some of the regulars. So yeah, happy to be here, guys. Thanks for having me up, Dark.
Got it, brother.
Jammer, just for the record, I'm hanging on to the stab here. These guys know 1,000 times more than I know. I'm just trying to
Hey,
keep
if,
up.
if you're on one side of the stand, I'm hanging on the other one with you there, Puncher. So no worries.
Yeah, all good, man.
So what are we expecting from the FOMC meeting, guys?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. I expect him to continue. I don't know. A part of me wants to say that he's so pissed at Trump, he's going to come out and just talk down the market. Uh, I don't know.
We used to
Maybe.
call these meetings the Federal Open Mouth Committee meeting.
Right, because as Josh will tell you, like anything of real import is usually leaked. Right, that's how the Fed works, so that they they maintain a kind of playing field of predictability. Right, like they don't want these tremendous unpredictable events. So I think if we were going to see something, it would have been leaked.
Correct.
KAG, what's up, bud? Network Access Group, that's you, man.
Oh,
Come on.
how are you guys? This is Lajos Horvat. I just want to add a quick thought for the earlier conversation about Bitcoin. It's my biggest problem was the institutional adoption of Bitcoin. It's the risk of a highly defected and corrupt market connected with a almost perfect product, and I'm just seeing more and more concern on other people's mine too. I just don't know what you guys thinking. It's just would be a better option. It's a different institutional adoption. I think it's like a reserve for companies or something like that. What's your thought? Thank you.
So the concern is around institutional adoption. I'm not sure I understood the question.
It's it's not really a question. It's just my thought. My biggest problem was the institutional adoption. We connected a highly defected market,
Yeah,
and
I understand.
actually, it's a cut-off market with a product which is almost 100%
Yeah.
perfect. I just don't know what could come from the connection.
Yeah, look, but ultimately it's inevitable, right? Because, excuse me, Bitcoin is enemy's money. So, as much as you might not like it or I might not like it and want to keep it as, this perfect asset that's only held by retail and small investors, I just don't think that's possible, right? Like the ultimately Gresham's law says all of this fiat money is just going to find its way into Bitcoin because why would you want to hold fiat? Why would you want to hold gold? You'd want to hold Bitcoin, right? So I think that's going to play out whether we like it or not.
Yeah, but do you think it would be a more better case scenario if the whole institutional adoption start with companies creating reserve for themselves and let the system it's build itself organically than with that market involvement without that market involvement?
Yeah, look, in a perfect world, I'd want things exactly as you said, right? I'd want everything on chain, no reason for any derivatives, right? Like that's a perfect world, but that's not big. That's not the world we live in. So ultimately, Wall Street's going to try to wrap itself around Bitcoin and try to offer every single imaginable product. But in the end, the good news here, and I keep saying it, is to me, the chain doesn't lie. And in the end, if Wall Street is playing games, they're gonna get caught. They're gonna get caught off sides, right? And somebody's always bigger. And you have nation states involved in this game. So you've got to be exceptionally courageous if you're a Wall Street guy and you're dealing in Bitcoin IOUs. It's a good way. It's a good way to blow out your firm, right? Like there's a scenario in which you just get wiped out. And the other thing that's interesting about this is that Bitcoin derivatives and what we'll call the Bitcoin complex has become a gravy train. So top Wall Street firms are making huge profits off of this complex, and I don't really think they want to see it get blown up. Josh, what's your thought on that?
So I'll just say this: I predict that there will be something of a blow up of one of these firms in the not too distant future, because I know how they play. I know that there are people that don't understand the risks and will think that they're fine. And you don't know. Listen, my only, how do I say this, genetic memory of this whole thing, I feel like I've lived through this life once or twice, is that Satoshi is already prepared for all these possibilities. And there are surprises that you'll catch up.
That's an exquisite take. I've been predicting something would blow up, and my prediction is it'll blow up to the upside with spot Bitcoin, Bitcoin on chain dislocating from derivatives. That would cause a massive short squeeze of Bitcoin on chain, right? If you saw the perpetual.
We'll have both.
Go ahead.
We'll have both at some point, and I'm not worried. I already know. Like Satoshi's already thought about them all. We've done it. I almost want to say this. We've been through the simulation, and you just don't know it. That's all I have to say.
Great point. And remember, Bitcoin and Satoshi built this around 0809, around derivative complexes exploding. Like this was designed with this in mind. So
kind of, yeah. I would say, I would say it was refined in 0809. It was originally built in the early 90s.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, let me just add here. I'm really on Josh's side on that one, because I don't think it's going to blow up the Bitcoin side. It's my fear is more probably, if it's a fear, it's coming from probably to slowing down the process, which should be a much steady process from now on. That's where my point in. Actually, I'm a really large Bitcoin holder, and I'm working actually with a small nation on creating the reserve. So But that's what we're seeing. That's the ETF market. It's a little bit more concerning for us than it probably should be. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, to address that, I'd say if you feel like you want a little fun, just a little fun, there's a little science fiction piece that I wrote recently and posted, and it's a little bit allegorical. Just read it.
Yeah, I read it. It was quite good. I encourage everybody to hit Josh's timeline and take a look. I think the name of the tweet is science fiction story or something. It was real.
Yeah, something like
Yeah,
that.
really cool. Thomas, how you doing,
Hey,
brother?
what? I'm just getting busy today. I got to run for office this year, so I know so I just get a little more busy than normal. Wanted to say hi to Josh. Josh,
Hello, former mayor. I
yeah,
mean, hello from this former mayor to your mayor.
yeah. So it's Josh. You know what it's like to do the local town stuff. It's a lot of time when you got to run. So a lot of phone time. Just we got I got a primary I got to run in. So
Well, what I
anyway.
liked about it was like you could be in the coffee shop and there'd be some little kid from second grade who you just spoke to at their classroom, and they'd be tugging on their mommy's skirt or something like that's the vice president of the United States over there. You're just a small town mayor, but it was kind of cute that way.
Yeah, it's anyway, the town I'm in is probably 17,000 people. So it's more than you can't know everybody. And we have with in New Jersey, we've got a decent amount of churn, probably 15-20% churn, maybe not that high, maybe 15% churn. So over the course of say a decade, at least 60% of the people, 50% of the people are net new. And obviously you got your old timers that have been here forever, but it's just a lot of work. I like doing it. I'm not saying I don't. I'm just saying I've just been busy, so I haven't been on the spaces as much.
Hey guys, if I may, and I don't know if you guys covered this before I hopped on. Did you guys talk MicroStrategy, Bitcoin acquisition strategy as it relates to the ATM? Josh, I know everyone's dying for more of your opinion on this. Is that a topic you guys have touched on today yet?
Yeah, we kind of tangentially, if not directly, addressed it. Um, yeah, so we talked about what would happen if MicroStrategy were to trade at a discount. We talked about convertible notes versus perpetual preferreds. Um, if there's anything you want us to go back over, just go ahead and ask, Jammer.
Well, just knowing, between Josh and Darkside, the two of you, I think I've seen kind of two differences of opinion. Darkside, you seem to be pro ATM. Let's gobble up as much Bitcoin as we can. Josh, you've been a little bit more critical of the ATM strategy. Would love to hear how just your two minds kind of find a middle ground, and what the most optimal acquisition strategy might be for Sailor. Or if you two just kind of agree to disagree on something like this.
I think we would have to talk offline a little bit. This has been such a good spaces. If I start going there at Hawk, it might get ugly. Who knows? I think that we have to talk offline and understand each other. I have a basic market makers issue, which is that if you have the company which has unlimited ability to sell, right? No short squeeze possibility, and they're just continually on the offer side at 2.5, just sitting there always. Basically, what's going to happen is at some point all the buyers will have bought, and they'll go, okay, well, how about I'll sell then at 2.4? How about 2.3 at 2? It's the natural thing. I was a government bond maker. When you can buy all you want, you just turn around and say, let me see what happens if I try to sell, and that's when the market gets hard. So I just kind of don't like the idea that it's so predictable, and so I think that it would be great if he had pauses and he was unpredictable, and something he just didn't sell for a month or two. That's what I would love to see.
Josh, there was a little. I guess I picked up on your thread last night, but a lot of chatter back and forth about whether it's a good idea to have a concentration of ownership. Now, I know the decentralization of Bitcoin has a certain ethos to it, and I think there's probably, I would say, as I understand, like the network effect and the relationship between adoption, price, and the energy that goes into the system, the more decentralized is, the better. We don't want to see concentration in hash power. We don't want to see concentration in ownership because it undermines what I'll call the decentralization ethos of Bitcoin. The more people who have it, the more broadly it's distributed, I think the better. So now we're sitting here with MicroStrategy well over 500,000. If they aspire to get to 1 million, and then you have other things like Cantor Fitzgerald and potentially other nation states or other big companies start to acquire, we don't want Bitcoin to turn into an oligopoly in terms of ownership. I just don't think it's good for the asset class.
I agree. I just don't want to go deeper than that right here.
Yeah, I sort of disagree, Thomas. In the end, you might not like it, or you might not want it, or you can argue about the ethos, but it's a free market. I mean, Bitcoin is money for your enemies. Now, going back to the market making concept, look, I think Josh and I are more aligned on this than you might think, except that I think that he has a fiduciary responsibility to sell Bitcoin. I mean, to sell, excuse me, to sell common and buy Bitcoin, right? If your stock price is trading at 2.5 times book, and you can buy Bitcoin essentially at a 60% discount, well, that's a business model that he should do all day. And we had an interesting discussion before you got here, Thomas. What happens if the book drops down to zero point 0.8 and drops below 1? Well, that becomes interesting. I'm with Josh here. You should sell Bitcoin and you should buy back your common stock, right? That's the fiduciary responsibility. So look, I think Saylor, in a way, has to accept the fact that he has a fiduciary responsibility, as he has sort of laid out on his conference calls, to increase his Bitcoin per share, right? And that means he is essentially a market maker. So,
So, Dark, so essentially, what you're saying, when MNAV is high, use your expensive stock to buy cheap Bitcoin on a relative basis, and the opposite is true.
yeah,
When you
yeah,
and so the issue with that is, I don't believe that Saylor views himself as the CEO of a company that is a Bitcoin proxy. He thinks his firm is bigger than that, a Bitcoin treasury company, and that they're and I think they're only going to do one side of what you said, which is when the MNAV is high, they'll sell to buy Bitcoin at a discount. But I don't think they'll, if there was a dip and the MNAV went below 1, that they would ever sell their Bitcoin.
yeah.
They would ride the
I
storm.
get it.
And so
And look,
it's one
the
side.
solution to this problem, Thomas, is to start a real operating company around having this Bitcoin, right? Like, that's how you solve this problem, is by actually having revenues. Now, before you got here, Josh brought up an absolutely brilliant idea that I hadn't considered, which is him issuing his own Bitcoin backed stablecoin, or him issuing dollar backed stablecoin, or both, right? Imagine he issues a Bitcoin backed stablecoin, and then he goes ahead and takes the money that he brings in and he puts it in treasuries, and now he's earning massive amounts of interest, right? Like, that makes sense to me. Again, at some point here, and I've been on this, kind of banging this drum. At some point here, there's going to be an operating company that springs up out of this stack of now 550,000 Bitcoin. It's just a matter of when. And once that happens and there's actual income, right, then you don't have to worry about the MNAV dropping. Like, then the perpetual money machine really kicks into gear.
Well, so Dark, I like that. I like that idea of a stable coin, and I like doing all kinds of stuff where you're using your huge position and using that collateral to create derivative products. Now, the issue with that, and I don't know where Saylor's head is at. I can have my suspicions that as soon as you put your collateral at risk, you have one toe over the line of selling it, because once you put it at risk, you have to accept some scenarios where you will part with some of your Bitcoin in certain things, unless you only do it at the edge. And I don't believe that they've got alternate cash flows that would allow them to cover it in the same way that the Cantor Fitzgerald guys do with Tether. Tether's got a free
Yeah.
cash flow that's significant,
So,
and they can back up a lot of what they're doing.
yeah, so Josh made a really good point earlier, which is that, and I agree with him, it's almost healthy if he's willing to sell some Bitcoin, right? Like, that's good for the market. It would take away this all I'm going to do is buy Bitcoin and hold it forever argument. So, if I was Saylor, I would be looking to issue bit bonds, right? I would take 100,000 of my Bitcoin and I'd borrow $100 billion with it, and then I would either take that and look to, do an arbitrage where I earn interest on it, or would actually get into a reinsurance thing, or, whatever business he wants to go into with that $100 billion, but something extremely low risk, that bangs out a return. Right? If he can borrow money at 1 or 2% and return 8% on it, well, that changes the entire model of the business. And if it means at the end that he sells some portion of that Bitcoin, so be it. The market will take it. The market would be happier with that. And Josh made this point. So, Josh, why don't you kind of go ahead and make that point again? That the level of ability for the market to absorb Bitcoin would take a lot of the stress out of the MicroStrategy story.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I fear that people fear that it's going to create an effect that's going to cause a waterfall. I don't think that sounds robust to me. It doesn't sound anti-fragile to me. So I mean, I think that he has to be willing to sell some once in a while. This whole never sell your Bitcoin mantra is consistent with like Hex or something like that. You never sell your. You have to be willing to show that this is a marketable security, that you're safe. In fact, that's what Elon was doing when he sold them. He said that. He said, I'm selling this to show that it can be done.
Hey, Dark. So imagine an instrument, a financial instrument that is, like a bit bond or something like that, where there is a deferral of in-kind withdrawal, where you could buy this product and not only get access to Bitcoin exposure, but in the future, make it 3 years, 5 years, pick a time frame where you could do an in-kind withdrawal. And so you really are buying a pure proxy. And for firms that are a little cautious about maybe buying direct Bitcoin, they could say, I'm going to buy an equity exposure or a bond product exposure backed by this equity. And if things change in the next 3 to 5 years, I can even do a partial in-kind withdrawal of the actual raw Bitcoin. That to me would be extremely
Yeah,
interesting.
genius, right? Like anytime you include in-kind redemptions, it's another way of saying I'm keeping the system honest, right? It inspires confidence in the system. Josh made this point earlier. I made the point, right? Like the fact that that they have the Bitcoin is very reassuring, right? If you're willing to do in-kind redemptions, then that's kind of another way of saying, we're not really doing IOUs.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way that the bond market protected itself when it introduced bond market futures was that the redemption was only one way. In other words, when you decided to deliver, it was the owner of the contract who delivered. You couldn't ever demand delivery, otherwise you'd freak everybody out at the last minute demanding delivery. So the only problem is I made like it was like my first big trade. I made a multi-billion-dollar delivery on a high coupon callable bond, very very low liquidity bond. And I had them all, but I didn't realize, because I was so young, that I had to have them, quote, in the box, meaning that they were actually sitting there at the finance desk. They weren't being lent out to anyone. So I came close to failing, which would cause the firm to go down. So I got to meet the CEO that time when I was only 23 years old.
I love it. What a great story.
Hey, I just wanted to comment real quick about the in-kind redemption. BlackRock did file for this in January, and I believe the SEC has sort of opened it up their public comment period or whatever. So BlackRock is signaling that they want this, and I think it would be awesome. And like Josh said, it wouldn't be for us plebs, if you own IBIT, but it would be for the institutions, and it would it's like a pressure valve, out of the system where we could potentially get screwed down the road as long as they're able to redeem in
Also, it
kind.
opens the door to no taxation from one in-kind security to the other. No.
I was about to say it's huge tax advantages for them.
No tax advantage.
So it's like it would take away a situation where they were maybe forced to sell if they didn't have in kind in the future. But I just want to comment on that. So hopefully that's coming.
Well, the other thing is the in-kind revolving door, where you can go in and out and not have a taxable event, allows you to have a self-custody, and that when financial products develop under a ETF roof, that I can move my Bitcoin into the ETF, do the structured product. Could be a Bitcoin backed loan, it could be something along those lines, And then when I'm done with that, I move it back to cold storage, and I don't have to do all of these accounting things with taxes. That to me would be tremendous. But the big thing for me is that it helps with, as Dark as you said, it validates the system and keeps the system honest. The thing with the gold market, for a lot of people who've been in gold market, is because it's so difficult to take the delivery at scale, people don't do it, and then so they've rehypothecated that market significantly. But what's the number? 50 to 1, 100 to 1? I don't know, but it's a big number. So there's all these claims on gold that cannot be satisfied if everyone makes the claim. And so you don't want that for Bitcoin, because I think it suppresses price discovery when there's essentially these synthetic ownership positions.
I think that was a feature, not a bug, of that whole system, Thomas.
Yeah, and I would speculate that whatever that number is, it's come down a little bit over the last few months. And I've heard a lot of people talk about the gold run's over. I'm kind of in the camp that the gold run's just getting started. I've been around just a little bit too long. I think Josh will speak to this. Things that are supposed to never dislocate, almost by definition, they dislocate, right, Josh?
Yeah. I mean, I think we could be heading up theoretically another 10x. I mean, the whole system is scared now of fiat, and I think that the Chinese, the Indian, these countries are probably hoarding as much gold, trying to sweep as much gold into the carpet as possible. And I've already said, I think Brazil is going to be the one to drop out. That's what I see in the future, and join us on our side. But we'll talk about that another day.
Oh, sounds good. I'd love to hear that thesis.
Well, Dark, you did your thesis on, for those who haven't listened, Dark, you did a podcast with the chiropractor guy, which I thought was excellent. I listened to it last night. So you talk about what the asymmetric bet there is on a sovereign level that could really propel the West ahead of BRICS nations. I don't
Yeah,
know if you wanted to talk about that at
well,
all
look,
a little bit.
because of the scenario between Bitcoin and gold, and so far they're not correlated assets, but ultimately I would expect that through Gresham's law, a lot of the money in gold will find its way into Bitcoin. And if I was in the West and I saw my enemy stacking massive amounts of physical gold, right? Well, what's the logical play? The logical play is to sell them your gold and demonetize it. Let them be stuck at the end holding a ginormous stack of gold. And there's precedent for this, right? We saw that, funny enough, as ironic, maybe it's history repeating itself, but it was the Chinese that stayed on the silver standard when the rest of the world went to the gold standard, right? And they ended up getting smoked. But the ratio between gold and silver in the ground is 17 to 1, right? There's 17 ounces of silver for every ounce of gold. That's been sort of a taken number. I'll assume it to be somewhat accurate. Well, why is gold trading, north of 100 or up by 100? It's trading about 100 to 1 right now. That really doesn't make any sense.
So,
Yeah, Jeff Booth talks about how, if you're thinking like the market chooses the side, right? The market gravitates toward the better money, right? You just got to pick correctly. And China, unfortunately for them, picked wrong last time. And it seems like they're going to pick wrong again
I
this
think
time.
we have a ways to go up, though, before that happens. And that adventure you speak of, Dark, is going to happen. I'll say that almost as certain as 84K on March 14th. Just watch for Brazil. They'll be your canary in the coal mine.
Even with their current political
Maybe with a different
leadership,
one.
you
I
think,
don't
Josh?
remember how the movie went exactly that well.
So, Josh, you can see a scenario lining up where the B in BRICS drops out, and they in the and it's almost the Western Hemisphere um, on maybe a Bitcoin reserve standard, and the rest of the world on a gold standard. Would you say that is a scenario that could play out?
Winner, winner, chicken dinner.
I agree too. I'm with Josh on this.
For the record, we've been saying that for a year and a half on these spaces. So another conspiracy theory, 184 and 0.
Yeah, well, that's right. These things do take longer than you think. But I mean, as Josh says, Brazil is really, if they drop out of BRICS, watch out. right? Like that shows sort of the huge kink in the armor, and there's going to be a lot of pressure on them to drop out. I never really kind of thought about the Brazil story so much, but I'm going to have to absorb what Josh is saying. I kind of agree with him, but I haven't done any research on it. But it's fascinating, right? And as you know, I see we got Simon. Simon's been talking about the U.S. as going into a multipolar world. That speaks more to a regional power, and Brazil falls under our region, right? So just more, Simon's kind of been screaming from the rooftops that this is coming. I think Josh is saying it in a different way, but I think they both end up in the same place. Simon, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll take the other side of that trade. And I'll give you my reasoning. My reasoning is I think people analyze countries as if they're sovereign, but I don't think any country is sovereign because unless you have a central bank that doesn't allow for the privatization of your money supply and the securitization and financialization of all your assets and the buying of all politicians. And so Europe and UK are examples of what happens when essentially BlackRock and global finance own every aspect of your political process, your assets, your country. You just get turned into a playground for war, for military industrial complex, for banks, for big pharma. And that's essentially the model. So if you look at what happened, essentially NATO was weaponized in order to sacrifice Europe. They were told that they have to invest in renewable energy, turn off their nuclear. That shallowed out Germany's military, the energy base, which destroyed its manufacturing base, which sent it into a recession and sacrificed the whole of Europe. And now it's being asset stripped, and politicians are just using every aspect for what BlackRock and financial institutions want them to do. I believe US is in the same process right now. And so the tariff policy was a mechanism exerted by the factions of BlackRock and those that control most of the financial world, that there's a more profitable opportunity in shrinking America to a regional power, getting all of its banks and financial institutions into Bitcoin. The central banks went into gold, and now they're managing the transition of asset stripping America like Europe, and transitioning to investing in BRICS. The same financial institutions are trying to infiltrate India. And so by escalating the military industrial complex and moving it over to India and Pakistan, you get to sell shitloads of weapons and you get to financialize the economy and try and get a foothold over BRICS. But the BlackRock and the financial institutions have already invested in those regions. And so they are facilitating the transfer. They're just trying to facilitate as much control as possible. And so if they're going to infiltrate Brazil, it won't be because they're trying to align it with the West. I believe it will be because they're trying to infiltrate as much parts of as BRICS, because they're co-investing with the GCC Saudi money, and the China money. But I'll tell you, if I'm right, I think it's highly unlikely that US will get a Bitcoin strategic reserve. I think the Trump administration will use it to get as much Bitcoin as possible. And I think the banks will engineer a scenario, like we were talking about, where they try and get as many of Americans' Bitcoins as possible. But I think the banks and financial institutions, those that control finance, they're asset stripping America rather than trying to help America survive. They're sacrificing it just like they did with Europe and UK.
Okay, Josh.
Yeah.
Josh, you got any thoughts? You want to kind of come back at
I
that?
don't know. I think maybe one day I should talk with Simon. Three conspiracy theorists walk into a bar. That can't be a coincidence.
I like it. I like it. I'd love to get on a call with you and Simon, man. I agree with Simon on about 95% of what he's coming from. If he's right,
I'm open to
if
it.
I always say if he's right, we're properly fucked. But I like to believe that the U.S., while under the thumb of these globalist interests, I think there's enough
Yeah.
populism here in the states. And just look, having living out west, I'm up in Montana right now. I just know that a lot of what he's thinking just could never happen up here. It just wouldn't work,
Yeah.
right? Like you're talking about a population where everybody's got 10 guns. Even the,
Well, remember Second Amendment. So the way they do coloured revolutions is they benefit from violence. So in Europe, while they were simultaneously sending the economy into a recession, they were manufacturing civil unrest by changing the
no,
demographics
I
of
get
the
it. I'm
of
just
the.
telling you, it wouldn't work up here. It wouldn't work in over 3/4 of America where they just have no interest in it, right? So
What do you mean wouldn't work? What would be the resistance against it?
the people,
Doing
the
what?
police force, they would, if you tried to, whatever your plan is, it just wouldn't work here, right? Like if you tried to put in, immigrants in here in northern Montana, good luck to you. That they'd be shipped out, right? It's just
Oh, got it.
what
Okay,
works
see,
is,
just
yeah,
certain regions
There's
wouldn't
also a few
allow for
people like
the.
me.
yeah.
There's also a few people like me that love history and pay a lot of attention to what Eisenhower said at the end of his term. So we'll talk about this sometime. I'd be happy to talk with you.
As a precursor to all this, Simon and Thomas on Saturday at Spaces Dark Hat went through a long historical narrative that I found fascinating.
Yeah,
Might
that
be
was
worth a
amazing.
listen.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. I think it's like the 2 minute and about 2.5 hour mark, 2 hours 40 minutes. The two of them engaged in a walk through history. That was a space I hosted on Saturday night. I encourage everybody to check it out. You can skip over the dark side puncher part and go right to the geniuses, but it was absolutely riveting. What was about an hour of you guys going back and forth, and I found it to be just unbelievably educational. So I
Yeah, I've learned
Thomas
a lot.
got rugged by his beautiful girlfriend. He had a roll.
But anyway, like speaking about the whole Bitcoin thing. Look, like after I released my video, obviously people are really stuck into wanting to know every detail of exactly how it might happen. And I just believe that it will happen. And now the exact ingredients of it is, you know, you create an environment. So look at Coinbase right now. So Coinbase is getting ever more complex. It's got custody, it's got futures, it's offering yield, it's got a lending product, it's got like every type of product you can imagine. So Coinbase looks like the equivalent of Binance. Um, do we really have a regulatory environment where I know there's I think it's got a money transmitter license. I know it's got multiple licenses around the world, but does anyone really know every claim on those Bitcoin and whether it all matches up? Is there anyone that's holding Coinbase accountable to that? And as it gets ever more complex, where the services are offered in multiple jurisdictions, you have segregations of regulations where, the lending services offered through one jurisdiction, the stablecoin is in a partnership with Circle. Circle's regulated in Abu Dhabi. It's also got its, whatever regulations it has as a registration with FinCEN for money transfer. Anyway, I don't think there is a regulatory environment right now where Coinbase and all the contracts against various different pools of Bitcoin would be fully understood. So there's one honeypot. The next honeypot is whatever is legally, contractually, allowed to happen with the Bitcoin in the different types of ETFs. Let's assume it's simple and someone's read through all the terms and conditions and it's completely illegal for them to do anything with it. But what is the relationship between the coins held in Coinbase? Are they segregated? And I got to be honest, I haven't just read through the agreements. Like, when I was in Celsius, we had to go through 8,000 pages of different types of legal agreements that took approximately 2 years. and $400 million to get through all of the different, to kind of unpack the whole thing. I don't think anyone's done that across these different ETFs. Now let's assume that they've got, that they're prepping up for their next round of projects. They want to allow for in-kind exit. They're getting the approval for that. It will go through the scrutiny in the process it needs to go through. Who's going to be able to do the in-kind withdrawal? How's that going to work? Does it create the potential of a run? Are those Bitcoins segregated within Coinbase? Exactly how does that work? And then you've got all that to unpack. Then you've got the stablecoin issuers. The stablecoin issuers, which is getting ever and ever closer to banks and financial institutions. So then you have the banking regulators, you have the attestations and audits with the assets that back it. But we also know the weakness in stablecoins is what we saw with USDC. You can hike rates, you can crash the bond market, you can need withdrawals, and those withdrawals can lead to needing to sell those bonds at a discount, and now suddenly you're insolvent. So do you have enough Bitcoin in reserve to back it? And then suddenly you need to sell all your Bitcoin in order to meet those obligations. So we know the weakness with stablecoins because we've seen it before. If you want, you can look at that on the real cowboy side, which was Terra Luna. I mean, I'm not saying this is Terra Luna. Everything will be significantly more sophisticated. But in the sophistication, you also have the ability to socialize the losses and privatize the gains through the traditional mechanisms, which
And
then has its market macro effect as well.
absolutely. And Simon, we've talked about this. My personal opinion is if they're going to rug, MicroStrategy and IBIT, the way they would do it is through a great taking, is through the DTCC, some type of collapse inside the DTCC. It's so easy, right? It's a much easier method than what you're talking about. And you get to the same spot, which is the deep state ends up with your Bitcoin.
Okay, then you got that. Then you've got, which I would only describe as a criminal like Howard Lutnick, through Cantor Fitzgerald, that's now enabling borrow against your Bitcoin.
Yep.
So you push Bitcoin into a bull market, which I think it will naturally go into and gravitate towards. And then you keep pushing the message that Michael Saylor's been indoctrinating the world into: don't sell your Bitcoin, borrow against it, don't create a tax liability. So they create the optimum scenario where enough people have borrowed against their Bitcoin.
For sure.
And remember, all of these players are sat around at the White House, all kind of competing, and yet figuring out their little
Yeah.
crypto cartel at the moment.
Yeah. Look, I agree with you. I think that, the proliferation of Bitcoin lending, and you'll see what we call predatory lending, where people are only asking you to put down, 20% or 30%, and then, you get a 30% price correction and they auto liquidate you, and now they have your Bitcoin. That's coming. Like, we know that's coming. But
Yeah, the way they did that with like the whole Celsius setup is, with Celsius, like they were offering yield, which Coinbase is offering yield. Then you had a hedge fund that was utilizing the front end of those different services. They were getting both stablecoin loans, and then they were putting their client Bitcoin at risk. So Tether ended up earning a bunch of yield by taking the Bitcoin and issuing Tether stablecoin. If you don't think that these sophisticated financial institutions are now issuing stablecoins are going to do a similar thing, you got another thing coming. But what Tether actually did is when it hit the strike, when it hit the margin call price, and then this all depends on the loan to value and their risk management strategy. When the Fed essentially created transitory inflation, and then had a big change in policy, and then we had a number of systemic black swan risk events in the banking system, and we also had the Terra Luna before that as well, which led to the mass selling of Bitcoin. They didn't actually sell the Bitcoin; they just transferred legal title to the Bitcoin to themselves and kept the Bitcoin. And then said, right, we've margin called your Bitcoin.
Yep. And look, it's coming. All of this stuff is part of the banking kind of tradfi banking gaming system. And this is what before you got here, Josh and I were kind of equally lamenting that we've been through this enough. We've been down this road enough. Dislocations are coming. Like all of these games will get resolved, and they won't be pretty. But
Yeah, watch.
In the end, Bitcoin and self custody is going to win. Hey, real quick, let's go to Matt and then Omar. They've got hands up.
Hang on, Josh was going to say something real
I
quick.
was just going
Josh,
to say something real quick. Yeah, watch for the bond market to be the opening door for this, because the U.S. government defends the bond market because bonds are bought by all kinds of entities that are very important, pension funds and such, as opposed to stocks. And if the bond market on, say, for instance, MicroStrategy or something starts to fail, they'll come in and the government will just buy out the bonds, nationalize the company, basically take the government ended up owning something like 40% of Citigroup. They just bought it out.
Remember those preferred?
I disagree that the government wants the Bitcoin. The government works for the banks, and the banks will just get your Bitcoin.
Yeah,
The banks don't care about government.
It'll be a favored bank, like JP Morgan took Barclays down.
Exactly.
Sorry,
the government's not looking to own any Bitcoin. They're just working to get as much Bitcoin in the hands of the technocrats, the banks, the Trump administration, all those people.
Agreed.
Maybe we'll get lucky and have a good person in office one day.
Maybe, but doubtfully. Hey, let's go to Matt and then Omar.
So the governments and the banks actually probably, I don't have evidence of this, but when you can see evidence of orbital bodies based on their movement. Even if you can't see directly what's going on, you can see what's going on around them. And so you can see it's called gravitational lensing. And you can see gravitational lensing in the behavior of certain parties. And it's very clear that they figured out that they could just keep printing money and basically externalize the risk. Simon said socialize the downside and privatize the upside. That's what they're doing writ large with the printer, because they're essentially stealing your purchasing power and the value of your entire family savings and all of the wealth and all the income you have, and they're transferring it to asset owners and the service providers that service those assets, because most asset-based fees are based on the size of the asset. So they're basically all just transferring money out of grandma's bank account and into their reinsurance accounts. That's bad.
And then
Now
Matt,
Bitcoin
sorry,
saves
just on
them.
that, and then you carry on.
Yeah.
But then you also
Yeah.
issue they're the same people that issue the ETF, and then they get the board seat from the ETF.
Oh yes, no, completely. Yeah, no, they control the media complex, the financial complex, the academic complex, the legal complex. I mean, the whole Babylonian thing turned into the Byzantinian thing, and then it just got very complex. And they use this labyrinth of rules and laws. I mean, really, it's called spelling, like magic, for a reason. And they use these words to try to contain us and to control us. And that's one of the things I loved about Bitcoin. As I took the red pill and broke out of the matrix from Wall Street, I started looking for where power was going to end up being. Like, what is actual sovereign? Where can I store my family's wealth to keep it safe from these jackals? And then I discovered Bitcoin, and then I discovered by extension blockchain and the concept of consensus, and actually distributing the power back to the people and inverting the polarity of these systems. Because right now we're inside a centralized system, which means we're all nodes at the edge, and then all of our power is being sucked towards the center by the centralized masses. And whoever you think is in control, that's where they are, in the middle, and we're on the edge freezing. And then Bitcoin reverses the polarity and it's like a capillary system that lets us move energy between us. And so that's what I love about this place and what I love about this space. And I know that Bitcoin solves the greed problem because it's algorithmically insensitive in terms of its issuance versus the demand. And that's what's beautiful about it. So I'll end it there.
Yeah, what a beautiful rant, Matt. 100% agree with you. Omar.
Yeah, so I wanted to go back to that BRICS subject because I think it's just very important as it relates to Bitcoin. And I wanted to respond to what Josh said about Brazil. I think it's actually quite the opposite. I think I'm going to side with Simon here. I think that more and more countries are actually trying to join BRICS right now, and a lot of them are traditional Western allies, from the Middle East, North Africa region to mineral-rich countries in Africa. I think the only way to see countries leave BRICS is if we were to keep Donald Trump forever. Because in the first place, BRICS has gotten stronger because of the way the Biden administration has handled the Russia-Ukraine war, the weaponization of the U.S. dollar, the sanctions, and it has just frightened a lot of those countries. And the way we have been, the way we've been treating our traditional allies uh, has just been pretty bipolar and schizophrenic. We go from loving them and hugging them to switching administration and backstabbing them. And now they're just coming to the conclusion that the United States has become an unreliable partner because one day you have somebody like we go from one extreme to another, and they're better dealing with and going and throwing themselves into the arms of Russia and China, who are dictatorships and have stable regimes that at least they know what to expect from those countries for a very long time. BRICS is not bad for Bitcoin. In fact, a lot of those countries we're seeing them buying Bitcoin. We're seeing the UAE, I'm sure, Saudi Arabia, a lot of those Gulf and those GCC countries are buying, whether it be through ETFs or even if you were to visit those countries, you'll see that there's OTC desks everywhere. It's widely accepted, and I'm pretty sure the governments are buying Bitcoin and they're using it for trade. So BRICS is getting stronger. There is currently 10 members, and there is, I think, nine countries that are considered referred to as partners with not full membership, and there's three observers. Turkey is one of them, which is a U.S. ally, a NATO member. So that's something to keep in mind. Brazil is nowhere near leaving BRICS. They're happy with BRICS, and they're giving them everything they're asking for in terms of free trade agreements and even military agreements, and that's something they know they're going to be able to get for the next few decades, as opposed to coming back to daddy America, where in 3 years, unfortunately, Trump might leave and end up with some psychopath from the left.
Great take. Great take. Josh, you want to go back on the Brazil thing?
Josh had to drop down, but it was great having him here.
Oh, that was
Dark.
awesome. Yeah, we'll reach out. We'll reach out to Josh with a special thank you. What a great wealth of knowledge, and we'll be looking to set up a space with Simon and Josh and Puncher and Thomas and really go deep on bricks. Omar. By the way, if you're not following these guys on stage, please give everybody a follow. Awesome space. One of our best. I'm really loving this conversation. It's nice to go deep on stuff that matters, not just number go up, but talking about derivatives, talking about synthetics, talking about all those different kind of headwinds that could potentially face Bitcoin. Personally, I'm still in the massive tailwind category. I think at a macro level, I think we're just getting started. But I do agree with Simon that there will come a time when if you borrow against your Bitcoin and you don't have proper reserves, you're going to lose it. Simon, what's up, bud?
Yeah, definitely, and just wanted to like on both conversations, the solution is already the system of Bitcoin and financial institutions is too complex for you to comprehend the risk, and that's what happens. They take a clean product like gold or Bitcoin, and they turn it into something that is subject to black swan, where you can't comprehend the risks, and you're not in the circle, you're not in the meetings where they engineer a geopolitical shift and they use macro events that is executed through financial products. And if you think that's a conspiracy theory, then I'm sorry, you just don't follow the money, because this is how it happens time and time again. Significant power is bestowed to those that have managed to either obtain sovereign wealth or have access to the capital flow of funds.
Yeah,
And those people, they have strategies that sit on a balance sheet and look at how do we maximize our return, by utilizing all the tools that we have in order to push the game in a certain direction. And so the way to protect yourself in both this multipolarity, I believe, is very good for Bitcoin, very good for Bitcoin, significantly better than having just the Fed print money and Bitcoin go up. Significantly better and significantly de-risked. And then also, uh, you're not going to know the timing of this. So many people ask me, "Oh, when is this going to happen? How long have I got?" I can't answer that question. I got no freaking idea what timing they're going to do. They're going to maximize the timing based upon the optimum moment, based upon they've got a whole load more financial products that they want to set up, and they want to get way more leverage into the system, and they want to get way more people to borrow against their Bitcoin until they actually do it. So that might be a load of time, but have it be known, they know where the world is going, and they do want your Bitcoin, and they don't give a shit about you, and they have the ability to get your Bitcoin however they need to get it. But the way you protect yourself is just don't play in their game. You just literally, when they want to crash the market, you'll be able to buy Bitcoin cheaper. When they're messing around with the market, as long as you don't have the leverage, as long as you're not 100% exposed to their game, and you haven't got all your funds locked up, you'll just sit back and watch, and you'll be the person that everyone comes to, licking the wig, because we saw it in 2022. The same will happen again. So own your own Bitcoin, you'll be fine.
Great point, Simon. And I think, if I can just translate a little bit there, what Simon's really saying is there's asymmetric information out there and you don't have it, right? And never, ever get involved in a game in which somebody has way more information than you, right? Now, I know that sounds crazy, but in many respects, that's why I don't trade low quality assets, right? The higher the quality asset, the less asymmetric information's out there, right? If you're trading in, crap crypto, well, guess what? Somebody knows what's happening long before you do. If you're trading in Bitcoin, it's a little bit of a different story. But ultimately, there's always asymmetric information. Try to hold the highest quality assets, and you reduce your exposure to those events substantially.
That should be taught in college, man. Thanks for that. That's a great way to put it.
Thanks, Omar. Hey, let's go to Eric and then Taylor.
Yeah, I think the conversation about multipolarism and BRICS and Bitcoin is one that isn't tied together very often, and it absolutely should be, because Bitcoin launched in January of 2009 and BRICS launched 4 months later. So, if you know anything about history, you can find anything provable about 20 years before it happens. So there's definitely a strategic play in between these two. And I think that the reason Bitcoin is getting elevated on a global scale at this point in time is because of its obviously globally neutral, but its ability to maintain itself without political interference. And I think that where we end up going right now is you're going to see BRICS. They've already announced that they were going to create a gold-backed currency. Trump has mentioned this before. I think that you'll have this multipolar world. It's a conversation I don't hear on here very often, too. I would love to hear thoughts. Nobody knows, but thoughts of how any actual gold-backed currency plays out. Because from my perspective, talking to KPMG auditors, there's absolutely no way you can ever prove a gold-backed currency. It's way too much assay and audit work to do. So I think Bitcoin has this tremendous role as a centerpiece that connects the multipolarism together. But I do think that the BRICS nations right now, again, this was planned in 2009. There's Operation Sandman that you can research, getting 100 nations to stop using the US dollar to crash the dollar. I don't think that's going to happen at this point. But I'd love to get your guys' opinion on that connector piece, because Bitcoin is that centerpiece. There is no political inference with the protocol at all.
Eric, consider
Well, there's
the
no
idea.
way that the gold's not trust me, bro. At the end of the
100%.
day, there's just no way. So, Dark, you mentioned earlier that you thought that gold's just in the beginning of a run. Why do you say that? And then if you could tie that into what
Yeah, so
Eric was asking.
my thesis on gold is that, these shorts, these claims that don't exist are going to have to get covered, right? If you were the Chinese, if you were these countries that may be adversarial to the U.S., right? This is a surface layer, a surface area attack, right? Our banks are overexposed to a gold run. So if you wanted to launch a speculative attack on the United States, maybe Taiwan's not the best place to do it because you're going to take huge losses. Everybody's going to take huge losses. Maybe the gold market's just a much easier, simpler way of attacking the U.S. kind of financial infrastructure, and maybe they know that. I think they probably have a pretty good idea. But ultimately, once that's over, however the gold situation resolves itself, you're left with a pet rock, right? So I'm not sure where the top is, but I personally think it's a lot higher than here. But that's just me. If I wanted to attack the U.S. financial system, I think the gold market is by far the easiest surface vector to attack. Does that help, Puncher?
Yeah, that helps quite a bit
Now
actually.
let's just go back to this gold backed currency, and then let's talk for a minute again about the idea Josh presented, which was a Bitcoin backed stablecoin. And I could imagine a case in which you issue a Bitcoin backed stablecoin, and you make the Bitcoin that's backing it available on chain for everybody to understand. Right? Doesn't that solve a lot of problems? Right? Your proof of reserves are right on chain. You can see them. You can see them move. You can see them grow. You can see them decline. That solves a lot of problems. That solves the medium of exchange problem, as far as Bitcoin not being able to handle the transactions. The stablecoin surely would be able to. I think that's really interesting. That's kind of resonating in my head right now, and I can't get it out. It's one of those things you can't unsee.
But why would the powers that be want something so transparent, having played in the system that they can create all these smoke screens and kind of rehypothecated systems and things like that? I guess it's inevitable, and that's where they see things are naturally flowing, so they want to lead turn it. I guess
Yeah, but
get ahead of
what
it.
if it comes out of the UAE? What if it comes out of the GCC, right, where they decide to do it? And all of a sudden, there's this unbelievable demand for their stablecoin, and they have to buy more Bitcoin to back it. What?
Yeah, the game theory says it's coming no matter what, and to go to Jeff Booth, like the world naturally runs to the better money, so there's no stopping it. You've got to get ahead of this.
So consider the idea that this emerges like Simon talks a lot about this, and I think it's probably true, right? That the banking cartels really control geopolitics, and that's been true for a long time. We can see the globally fiat is in its final innings. How when it blows up is it's hard to say. It could be soon. It could be 5 years from now, but within a planning horizon. I posted an infographic that I generated on this point, where what could emerge here around this Brazil scenario is one that's about the banking system being retooled in this pivot, where we move to a trading block that's Western Hemisphere versus Eastern, Bitcoin versus gold-based system. This is, I think, what what Josh is, I think, pointing to, that this happens, and it could happen over the course of the next few years. It'd be very interesting to see how that works. But the driving factor is trading blocks and security, and the banking follows that under a retooling of the banking system.
Go. Sorry, so many hands. Simon, and then we'll go to
Yo.
Taylor.
I think Taylor was first.
Taylor, sorry. Go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, I had a couple of comments and two questions. Uh, isn't the Bitcoin backed stablecoin with proof of reserves, wasn't that just Terra Luna, if I remember correctly? Like that's they also showed their
It
quote
was, but it
unquote.
had its own shitcoin to try and
Oh yeah,
stabilize the price.
their own shit stablecoin, right?
No, they also had a shitcoin that was used in order to constrict and expand the supply, and then they hedged out into Bitcoin,
Okay, I don't.
and then they had to do cascading liquidations when the shitcoin failed.
Yeah, just stupid garbage. Okay. My first questions were so Darkside, you had said that you don't think most of America would like go along with it in parts of America like Montana and stuff, but don't you feel like a lot of that was kind of proven wrong, disappointingly during the COVID? And the follow up to that is we purged all the good military people, right, and the or a lot of them, and police and stuff at that time. And I know the administration now is trying to get a bunch of those guys back. So my follow up question there is like, Puncher, do you know anything about kind of the status of how that's going at all? Have you heard anything?
Uh, I'll know more in 3 hours because I'm meeting one of the last remaining warriors who has somehow made it through all that bullshit, and I'm gonna have dinner with him tonight. So I will ask.
Yeah, that'd be good. Because yeah, I mean, I used to really think that too. I was obviously disappointed by my fellow countrymen during the fake pandemic. So
Yeah, look, up if you were up where I'm at during the pandemic, man, life went on. Food was plentiful. It just
yeah,
wasn't.
I'm in Red,
Again,
Utah. I was in Red, Utah, man, and like I worked every day. Nothing changed for me. And any restaurant that tried to restrict me, I just told them that I had the governor's mental health exemption. And then when they asked if I had papers to show that, I said, "Oh, I'm not sure you're allowed to ask me about that," and stuff like that. And I played the game, but
yeah, well, don't take
you know,
this the wrong way, but it's kind of known that the Mormon community is extremely obedient, right? Like that's one of the characteristics of being
yeah.
Mormon.
Deference to authority is an issue, like that's for sure.
That's
So
right, and you don't find that up here. So yeah, I could understand where Red Utah would have problems during COVID, but
it's kind of funny because it's kind of actually a two-sided coin there, because we also were born out of like leaving the U.S. federal government and telling them to f themselves and declaring war on the federal government, and actually being quite a rebellious population. But yeah, that's not necessarily contemporary Mormonism. So
yeah,
Well,
I agree.
I'm out of turn here, but I'm going to interject on this. So, to kind of give you an idea of what they were planning to do, the defund the police movement had nothing to do with actually defunding the police. It's a communist construct to nationalize the police force. So that failed. So what their intention was to be able to rally the American people to defund their own police, which are, human beings who live in your neighborhood, who their kids go to school with you. They're going to take your side as a citizen. But they wanted the UN model, which was defund the localized police where they live in your neighborhood, and then create a military version of police that would be obedient to any sort of takeover. So that is a huge piece to stand by dark side, because I was in LA when COVID hit, and it was so bad. I left everything and moved to Texas. And when I got here, there were still masks. There were still people. I went to the grocery store and was telling people to take their mask off, but it wasn't nearly as bad. And the American spirit's still alive in many states around the country. But the defund the police, nationalization of police force was a major piece of that legislation they were trying to pass, and it failed. That's a big sign for America.
Yeah, great point, Eric. I agree 100%, man. It failed. I think the way you laid that out was beautiful. What a great presentation of your argument. Fantastic. Let's see. We got Omar.
Just to add something to that, the fact that it failed in lots of places woke a lot of people up who otherwise would have followed at the time. Now I think, I'm looking at my friends who all did what they were told. That's not going to happen next time. They believe that they were hoodwinked, and their radar is up a whole lot more than it was pre-COVID.
I mean, there's a whole argument that Operation Warp Speed was a double entendre, and that by making things go faster, we basically inoculated the population to the lockdown and all of the social engineering and controls and governance. So, and to your point, Puncher, I had some friends who are a little bit more sheep-like, and even they are saying, "I'm not locking down again. I'm not doing that again. 15 days, my ass." So they really screwed the pooch there, because they were using technocracy and academia to build a class of people who listen to the experts exclusively. And if you have a white lab coat on, I'm just going to go ahead and believe you. And thankfully, I think that the COVID thing partially woke people up.
Yeah, and look, Matt, that's the point I've been trying to make to Simon, right? Is that this country is not prepared. The parts of this country, the overwhelming majority of this country, is not going to go along with their plan. So they may try it here, but I think it fails. The American spirit is just different. It's a different place than Europe. And you may try to asset strip it. You may be successful, but ultimately we'll just strip the assets back at the with the Second Amendment. That's what I believe. Man, I also kind of always flash back to the movie The Untouchables, right? There's a group of elite technocrats that believe they're untouchable in the modern society, and in reality, nobody's untouchable. It just takes a few really courageous people to overthrow the system. And I honestly believe America survives. And with that, I'll let Simon argue it.
No, I mean, America does survive. It just becomes a tool for the military industrial complex, the banking, and just like, they just use it as a tool. And I'd argue they already have. They stopped investing in infrastructure decades ago. They have been using America like to siphon off and fund all these wars for decades now. They've already been doing it. They're multiple decades into the strategy. And now they're just hitting the point where people are starting to get extreme right and left, because they're wondering where all their freaking money went. Like COVID was one of those. Like this has been, this is being executed as we speak, because there's no investment in infrastructure. There's no investment in anything that helps the people. Tariffs is going to wipe out medium-sized businesses. The cost of living crisis that's going to come from this, like from the tariff policy. And this is the strategic transfer of significant assets of everyday Americans and medium-sized businesses over to large multinational corporations that are now engineering the strategy of just utilizing America for all of its final assets and building that technocracy. It's happening right now.
Yeah, no, it's true. But at the same time, I look at the infrastructure in Vegas as being built up every day. It's awesome. We don't have
Is that
traffic.
private or government? That's private, right?
No, it's government. But again, like it's a really interesting. Vegas is a fascinating place because while we have government, obviously, right, the government in Las Vegas is controlled by money, by the casinos, right, and they're making decisions which are best for them. They don't care about this asset stripping concept, right? They understand if their town, falls to shit, then their workers become unhappy and then the whole thing crumbles. So, the taxes are low, the infrastructure is amazing. We barely ever have a traffic jam. We're at the kind of state of the art with autonomous vehicles. I'm starting to see them on the street all the time. And this is kind of true throughout the West, right? It's just one of the things that I think is true. And don't I'm not trying to knock in any way, right? I'm just saying that the view of America is the view of the coastal elites, especially from Europe, right? Like you see America as being New York, California, Massachusetts, Maryland, New Jersey, like a handful of states. But that doesn't tell the American story. That tells the story of the America that's been infiltrated. But the overwhelming majority of this country has no interest in that bullshit, right? It's really interesting. Like the local police force here in Montana, they're not gonna turn on their people. They have no interest, right? Like they're supported by their people. Like there's no ban the blue. I mean, you'd have to go to somewhere in Bozeman or some crazy little town in Montana, but where there's a university and everybody's on the dole. But ultimately, we got more cows than people here, right? So like you just understand that it's not going to be as easy as the coastal elites think, and at some point they're going to push it too far, and when they do, they're going to meet dire consequences. I truly believe that America's just not going to take it. And to Puncher's point, people that may have been inclined to be submissive to the system, they fucked that up with COVID, right? Like people have seen enough. Enough people's, lost their parents, lost friends to the vaccine. You know, they listen to the lies. Like people, only the communists don't listen to the lies, right? Like 14 days to stop the spread and safe and effective. Like we every lie is deep ingrained in our heads. So I just think it's a different world today, and I don't think they're going to pull it off. I think they're going to try. I really think. Well, I know they're going to try. I just think they're going to fail.
That, by the way, that is communism, where everybody lies all the time. And just realize that when and if you lie, you're adding to the power of that system. The truth is way more powerful. But communism is a lie told all the time that everybody, even people don't believe it, but they still run with the lie. Simon, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, well, okay, wherever it gets, just have it be known that anything that involves physical violence tends to benefit the state because they tend to weaponize it, and they actually engineer it. They engineer, you saw January the 6th, they infiltrate it, they use it, they create a narrative, and then you end up with a bunch of technology and changes the laws that looks indistinguishable between what you thought the Constitution looked like. But if you really want to fight against it, is the one thing I've learned is it's money. If you want to economically cripple it, the people do have the power by where they spend their money. And the people do have the power by deleveraging the machine, by not taking on debt and not repaying their debt. It's not actually taxes. Most people think not paying taxes, they don't need your taxes. It's actually the creation of money through debt, which is the perpetrator of the system. So opt out with Bitcoin, and you're already breaking the system, and you're already doing your resistance, and it's a peaceful resistance. In that sense, the problem is there's not enough people are doing it. Do you want to pivot the conversation to the BRICS currency, or do you want to stay on this
Yes,
thread?
yes. I wanted to respond to what Eric was saying earlier about a gold-backed currency. So Eric, this is basically what happened. They've been studying it for years and years and years, and they're finding major issues with that, because that currency's value is going to be directly correlated to local gold supplies. And one of the main issues that they had would be global imbalance. BRICS is mainly based on trade, and they've determined basically that countries without gold reserves would be at a huge disadvantage in international trade. Now, the biggest issue that they had, biggest of them all, would be the lack of flexibility. So the governments would not be able to basically respond quickly in the event of any sort of crisis, like recessions or wars, because that's going to require a quick adjustment of the money supply, and that has always been their block for them to move forward with the idea. But again, if we go back and see, talking about Bitcoin, Bitcoin would solve all of this. And we know that they have Bitcoin in mind, because a lot of them have already started trading um, using Bitcoin. So we're heading towards something. We don't know what it is, but it's going to be something huge. And the good news is that what it seems like, the way the world is shaping right now, in terms, I mean, with respect to Bitcoin, is we're seeing South America embracing it, Africa embracing it, North America, thanks to Trump, embracing it. In Asia, they're pretty much there. Who's left behind? Europe. I think that Bitcoin is going to represent the end of Europe, because they're going to be left behind, and those socialist governments are going to, aside from all the bad calls from a geopolitical standpoint that they're making right now, Bitcoin might lead to the end of the EU, as we've respected it for so many years. So yeah, that's basically where I think we're heading.
Yeah, I agree. And further, I think that the Europeans, well, not the Europeans, but the European Central Bank and Brussels will fight back through a banking crisis and try their central bank digital currency. I
I
really
think
think.
I think what they'll try and do. This is if I were to. This is pure speculation. But if I wanted to take America down the same place that Europe is going, I do it by strategically creating an event like tariffs to have capital outflows. I'd redeploy all of the pension money in the ETFs over to emerging markets, and I'd create a compelling vision where all the immigrants in America want to go back home, because there's actually more of a compelling future in those countries. And then you create civil unrest, and you don't have the immigrants that want to do the work that is needed in order to maintain the society. So that's what I think they're trying to engineer, and then they
Yeah.
asset strip all of the assets.
All right, let's, Simon. I hope you're wrong, man. I really do. I
I
think
hope
you're
I'm
right.
wrong
I
too.
think. Well, I agree with you. They're going to try it. I just don't agree with you. They're going to be successful. Let's go to Jammer, Dog said, and then we'll go to my buddy Gary Cardone. How you doing, Gary? Real quick.
Good, buddy. Good. Trying to get some money moved around.
Nice.
Pay these fucking taxes. God damn, I really just hate paying that shit.
Couldn't agree more.
Hate,
All right, let's
hate it.
real quick. Let's hit Jammer, Dog said, and then we'll get back to Gary.
Yeah, hey guys, I'm gonna pop down and get some work done, but figured I'd leave you guys with one man's two sats here. For anyone in the audience who's listening to this discussion today, and by the way, fantastic space, guys. I've really enjoyed this morning. Uh, Understandably so. I think a lot of people might be feeling a large sense of uncertainty listening to all this, and thinking about the world that they're living in, and where does this all head? And I think that's natural. And you know, again, one man's two sats. When you ask yourself, where's the safest place to invest time and energy? To me, I always come back to a simple answer of self resilience. And of course, Bitcoin is a key part of the self resilience stack, but it's not the only thing. And I think there's a lot of areas that we can all kind of audit ourselves and ask, how self resilient am I? Am I working today on building income generating skills? Go learn how to sell, go learn how to prompt engineer, go learn how to do things that provide value to the people around you. There's a whole geographic element to the self resilience that we've touched on a little bit here. Where in the country do I live? So much to be thinking about, and I know it can be a little bit daunting, but when you're met with that feeling of uncertainty, I think the aspect of your life that you can be certain about and certain about an investment you're making is into your own self resilience stack. So keep that front of mind. I think there's some fun ways to do it. Go hop in your truck this weekend and see if you can survive 2 days in the woods. Was it comfortable or was it uncomfortable? A lot of things you can do to put yourself in a more self resilient place, and I think that's the winning position from here on out. So, thank you, Dark. Thank you, Puncher. Thank you,
Thank
Matt. Great
you.
space. Recommend everybody follow all the speakers up here. A wealth of knowledge in a group that's getting together every day to talk and share ideas. So thank you so much for letting me up here, guys, and have a great day.
Thanks, Jammer. I had
Thanks,
the
Jam.
opportunity to meet Jammer, and we had a little meetup. And I can assure you, he would survive just fine 2 days in the backcountry. You don't have to worry about Jammer. He knows what he's talking about. What Doug said, and then we'll get over to Gary.
Yeah, hey guys, thanks for bringing me up. Yeah, I wanted to kind of echo what Jammer said, in terms of self resiliency, but also self sovereignty, and truly, owning your own value, which is really what Bitcoin allows us to do. And it's one of the important things I think, Dark, every time I come into these spaces, really what we're talking about is just, the breadth of knowledge on the scarcity component and all the attractive aspects of Bitcoin and why it's, truly the future, of our generation. And I think one of the things about X that has allowed us really to have the point of view that we have is just the amount of knowledge that we continue to see every day. And then, we drum up these spaces and all these experts just come on and just kind of just share their life stories and their perspective of things truly allows us to kind of have a different viewpoint than those that just accept whatever the media says and all the shenanigans that goes on in government and all this. One of the things maybe that I'd like to push back with what Simon said is that I don't believe that the USA is captured. I certainly don't think the people in the USA have been captured, because if you look at the results of the election of all the precincts across the country, man, even in California, a lot of those precincts turned red. And that kind of just goes to show that people are really waking up to what's going on. And really, the only light that's like shining, obviously aside from Christ, is Bitcoin. And which kind of actually brings me to my next point. And I'd like to ask the panel here about this transparency of Saylor. Now, look, I'm a fan of Saylor, right? I mean, I think he's good. I'm net positive for the space, but I guess for me, like one of the things I really don't like, and I'd like to hear your take on this, is every time he comes out another 1,500, 15,000, BTC bought and so on and so forth. Like there's no record on chain, right? There's no visible wallet. Like we don't see the coins being moved, to a wallet where we can track, like River, for example. What do you guys think about that? And now, of course, if these other firms like Cantor and they start doing all these things and start buying and raising money to buy more Bitcoin, but they're not showing their wallet. Uh, could we really trust that? Because if we can't verify, so I guess like, do you all think about that? And how would you see that maybe like changing in the future?
So we touched on this earlier in the space, and for those that have just hopped on, really encourage you to go back and listen into the beginning of the space. We had Josh Mandel up, and we really kind of went deep on these very subjects. But to your point, look, I'd love to see him show on-chain proof of reserves. I think that's absolutely imperative at some point. I don't know when that point is. I think he's a little bit stuck right now because the way they do custody, right? That being Coinbase or Bank of New York Mellon or any of the big custody shops, they don't do it, right? So he's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. He's in a financial system that he has to play by their rules. But I think as the technologies get better and as more custodians come in, I'm hopeful that he will go to full proof of reserves. I think it's critical, right? Because at some point, it's going to be, fuck you, show me. And I don't know when we get to that point, but we will, because somebody else will come along and do it the right way, right? And that will force his hand. So I'm optimistic that we'll get there. I just don't think we're there today. And I also don't think he wants to put, let's say, a target on his wallets, if I could call it that way. Um, but ultimately, I think as custody technologies get better and better, I suspect that companies are going to go proof of reserves like River, and we'll get there. I just
Hey, Dark, I want to respond to that because Sailor did respond to that in a space with Jan Vanek. It was a question that was asked a while ago, and he did mention that it's mostly security and risk management, but he also said that there was corporate governance, and MicroStrategy is a public company, and its Bitcoin purchases are audited and disclosed in SEC filings. So
yeah.
that would be a big deal if he was lying about
But
that.
it's not, again, as we talked about earlier, it's not necessarily that he's lying, right? The question is Coinbase lying, right? Are there IOUs being traded, right? In other words, and Josh and I made this point earlier, if Saylor was getting an IOU from Goldman Sachs for 20,000 Bitcoin and they were paying him 10% interest, would you have a problem with that? Omar?
Yeah, I would, but isn't he using cold storage for his Bitcoin? I thought he was using, yeah, he is using Coinbase as a
Yes, but
custodian, but
again, if again, my question is Goldman Sachs being an over-the-counter desk, they offer him 20,000 Bitcoin, they don't deliver, and they give him an IOU and give him a 10% interest rate, right? Do you have a problem with that? Now, I guess
yeah, sure, absolutely.
right, but in other words, I'm not sure if he does because
Yeah,
he's
yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
he's in the financial system, right? And I always make this point. All of these companies, MicroStrategy, all of the companies that are doing Bitcoin Treasury strategies, IBIT, and all the ETFs, they are fiat investments on fiat rails. And in the fiat world, if Goldman Sachs gives you an IOU, that's pretty good, right? And if they're willing to pay you interest, that's even better. And that's how the failure to deliver market works, right? So there's precedent for this. This isn't like something I'm making up. If you're in traditional finance, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right?
I mean, we've seen it in the equities market in 2020.
Yeah, well, I mean, you see it in the equities market today. There's tons
Yeah.
of companies that you can't borrow their stock, and if you want to borrow, you have to pay some significant interest rate, right? And when I was on the floor of the exchange, just so everybody understands this, on the options exchange, market makers are given a short sale exemption. So big companies like Citadel and Goldman Sachs and Susquehanna and Jane Street, they're all options market makers, and they all utilize that exemption to strategically fail to deliver hard to borrow stocks. It's how the game is played. So to think that it was going on in the Bitcoin market would not surprise me in the least, right? Like that's part of the traditional finance engineering of the game, right? And that's why Bitcoin in cold storage and self custody, right? It's a bearer asset, and you don't have to deal with these things, right? Like that. That's why I always post that. Buy Bitcoin, hold it in self custody. You relieve yourself of all of these potential market dislocations. And again, we talked about this significantly earlier, so I encourage everybody to go back and listen to the first part of the space. Josh Mandel kind of laid it out. I laid it out. We agreed on almost all of these points. A dislocation is going to come. It's just a question of when. And he thinks it's.
Hey, just a single data point, and I don't know if anybody else has had this experience recently on Coinbase, and I've been on Coinbase since you could buy Bitcoin, and I buy it through others, but I continue to buy it through Coinbase. It used to be that my EFT, when my funds cleared, I could then self custody and send it to my cold storage. It's now taking weeks before those funds are released. Just
Same
something
with
to
Kraken.
think
Same
about.
with Kraken.
So,
Yep.
so let me give you
Yep.
both sides of that coin. One would be they don't have it. But since we kind of know they do have it, Joe C would say that that's just part of their new strategy around anti-money laundering, right? Which I guess you can make that argument, and also the way in which they custody Bitcoin is they have multiple cold storage scenarios or wallets, and then they have like their hot wallets. And in order for you to be able to withdraw your Bitcoin, they have to move Bitcoin from cold storage into the hot wallet, and that's an extremely laborious procedure that they go through. It's all part of their security infrastructure. So
I remember because you used to be able to put your Bitcoin in essentially cold storage. They
yep.
called it the vault at the time. So maybe that's
Yeah,
what
again,
this is. But
we're not.
yeah,
I'm
just
not. I don't want everyone to jump to the conclusion that there's failure to deliver in the Bitcoin market, but I would assume that there is. If I had to guess, OTC desks are issuing IOUs and then paying interest on those IOUs, and that's the way traditional finance works.
fair enough. We got who we get? Simon then Eric, or vice versa. I don't know.
I was going to go back to the BRICS thing. For those of you that don't know, firstly, BRICS only has one goal, and that is to do trades with each other without being priced in dollars. So they use their local currencies to trade with each other. It's not a United Nations. They don't have to get on with each other. They can be both allies and in some areas and enemies in other areas. But that's what they have done. And the reason that they're getting like progress right now is because BRICS partnered with the GCC, which is the Gulf countries headed by Saudi Arabia, and together they push back with the catalyst being the sanctioning of Russia's central bank reserves. That was like the main catalyst that really triggered everything off. And then eventually they built significant power with BlackRock to the point where the board member of Saudi Aramco is now on the board of BlackRock. And so they decided to weaponize sovereign wealth and China's manufacturing base and reserves as the base. Say Saudi Arabia and China were the base of the two blocks, and then they unified in order to co-opt the financial institutions that basically control all the ETFs and everything in order to get to where we are today. But on the currency side, they've said that they wouldn't launch a currency. They have said that they had a plan. They did release a white paper. They're not necessarily going to release one. They might do, they might not. But in the white paper, the design it was a distributed ledger where each country that's a member of BRICS would become a node operator. And their job is that when they enter into a trade, let's say you want to do between Saudi and China, you want to do a big oil trade, then you mint some units. Something's called the unit, and it's a one-way trade. Once you mint those units, you have to contribute 40% gold and 60% your local currency. And then that unit can't be unmined, but it can trade on the secondary market. And so every time you do a bilateral trade between a BRICS member, you mint the unit and that becomes the money supply. The main problem with it is that they wanted to create a decentralized mechanism for storing the 40% gold, which involved everyone having their own, as a member, you have an agreement to store gold in your country. And then you have to have like an audit process for determining that you have that gold in your country. That's where the Bitcoin story becomes really, really interesting, because everything works. And by the way, you could have your own mechanism. So the key difference is you have your own governance structure, you have your own CBDC, you have your own stable coin, you have your own local fiat currency, you have it connected to the mBridge rails or whatever. You can connect it to the payments outside the Swift system. They're not telling you how to do that. You just contribute to it as you mint the unit. But once we all know that the weakness there is a country could default, keep their gold as in their own currency, and then you lose some of the value behind the unit. So it is a Bitcoin story. Once they figure out that the only way to audit and have a multi-sig type of scenario to make that work would be, using Bitcoin. And so bit by bit, I think you're going to see this is like the foundation of a settlement layer where Bitcoin solves a problem. And of the members, I can't prove it, but I'm almost certain that UAE, Russia, Iran, probably China already have significant strategic reserves. They're just not disclosing them. And already they're engaged. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia. According to public records, it's not even in the top 10 gold owners. That's a joke, And according to the records, China only has 2,500 tons of gold. I think everyone that's like kind of looked into it thinks they got about 22,500 tons of gold. So they don't disclose these things, but a Bitcoin story is a very interesting mechanism that could lay the foundation for this multipolarity between these different blocks.
Yeah, the Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, they have no qualms about taking, I forget the name of the types of gold, but it comes from like child labor mines and things like that. I mean, they have it. It's just not the gold that's good delivery here in the West. So they got tons, and probably why they're not claiming it on any official balance sheet.
Yeah, Simon, good point about Amin Nasser, the Aramco CEO being added to BlackRock's board. I think it happened like 2 years ago, and they weren't even hiding it. They opened a billion offices throughout Saudi Arabia, and they were openly saying that they're basically partnering to get access to those markets, and mostly throughout Asia and those same BRICS countries that we're talking about. So yeah, there's definitely something cooking, and I think that. Not sure if it's good or bad, but it's
Well, I think multipolar is a good. Again, you got to ask for what. I think multipolar is a good Bitcoin story, and I think it's good for global peace. And so, but if you've got all your money invested in America, Europe, and you would expect that hopefully BlackRock will change your allocation when they want to change. But if you're a self-managed, then you've got to start thinking about what that looks like for you. And the easiest answer for me is just, stick with Bitcoin. Like that's the easy answer.
so here's my question to you. Whose side do you think BlackRock is on? Do you think they're on the West side or they're on BlackRock's side solely?
I think BlackRock controls the majority of the Trump administration. I think it was their idea to do tariff policies or to install Trump to do tariff policies. But I think most banks are BRICS aligned right now. And because they're BRICS aligned, they want to redeploy capital into growth. And so they're engineering the tariff policy in order to have a new return on investment. But they want to leave a chunk of money in America for all the AI and robotics and the whole technocratic flow. So they're global. They don't care. All they're doing is they're sat down saying, we got to produce a new profit in the next 3 months. What's the strategy and what's the next few years look like? And so they move capital around the world, and there's no allegiance to a country. There's no emotion. There's no if they want to create a war, they'll create a war. There's no humanity there. It's just literally, how do we redeploy capital in order to engineer the game, and they take the world chessboard and move capital where they think it makes the most sense.
Got Eric and then Jesse, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's always important to remember it. I don't know who I can't make the assumption of who is controlling who, but I think it's important to understand that Trump did appoint BlackRock as the Treasury asset manager in 2020, right, or 2019, right before he left office. So there's definitely correlations there. You know, who controls who is speculation at this point,
The money always controls whoever needs the money, and
oh,
politicians always need money. They don't have money, but
oh yeah,
they
yeah.
do allow you to co-invest with them. But the politician never controls the money. The money always, if you sell equity in your company, you are owned by the investor. If you borrow from the bank, you're controlled by the bank. If you're a politician, you need money from the backers. It's always the money that controls.
Of course. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you and I are well aligned on many things, but I just try not to speculate who controls who because I don't know. Totally logical deduction. BlackRock is the magnetic force of money throughout the entire globe. It is where the compass points north, and that is in every region of the world. Ukraine probably was started by them so they could rebuild it. This is a big part of the world we live in. But and I think they have a $500 billion contract to rebuild Ukraine already.
And they
But
also control the CIA.
yeah, of course, yeah, and many other agencies around the world. But I think that this space has been so good, and I love having Simon on here and Thomas and like everybody on here because if you rewind and listen to this, there's many spaces that jump from subject to subject, and you kind of get lost in them, and they don't really connect. This one has connected a bunch of dots for me. Number one, like Simon, I'd love to be on a panel with you and just discuss history and all these things. We're very well aligned. But I've got to get to work in a few minutes here. And uh, I think if you really rewind and listen to this, a few things make sense to me. Number one, the sailor custody issue, I think, is one that is bothering the market by itself. We definitely need to see it on chain. I think we will see it on chain eventually. But then we talked about gold-backed currencies, BRICS. BRICS isn't talked about enough. I think Simon does a brilliant job explaining that. The bridge system is unique, and I don't know what the success ratio of it will be because of the gold backing component and no one trusting each other. That is the issue with gold. So I'm glad we talked about that because I'm right on line there. But it also connected for me a couple of dots. Talking about a Bitcoin backed stable coin and gold backed anything. Look at Tether and Lightning. Tether just hopped on Lightning, or they're getting ready to launch on Lightning for payments. But they also just bought 7.7 tons of gold for their gold-backed stablecoin, which I assume will be on those rails soon. This is a really good conversation, guys. I wish I didn't have a call coming up here that I'm already a minute late for. Thank you for having me on here. This has been absolutely incredible. Keep it going. I'm going to try to hop on later if I can, but thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Eric. So here's one dot that's not connected for me. If BlackRock controlled Trump in the first administration, how did he get unseated? Who unseated him in the second time around? And then who is it that wanted him whacked in Butler, Pennsylvania? If BlackRock is pulling the strings here.
Yeah, so my framework is you have different factions that are sometimes on the same teams and sometimes they're not. I just did a post on how I analyze the Netanyahu Trump relationship and what's happening with the escalations right now. But you have politicians which are more aligned with more money to different factions, and most of the time, you in a bull market, where you're sticking to the same construct, military, big pharma, and banking lobby, the major pockets of capital are often all on the same team, but sometimes they diverge. And so sometimes the military industrial complex wants to aggravate a war when the banking lobby actually wants to create an environment of peace. And the banking lobby is also connected to the large pools of capital like BlackRock. And so BlackRock may decide that, we now have access to Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth. And Saudi Arabia wants a different thing than the military industrial complex wants. And so if you look at the friction right now, Trump is backed by banks, Netanyahu's backed by military, and they're not on the same team right now. They were on the same team under the Biden administration because Biden was a neocon. He was backed by mainly military. And so he was executing the vision of taking the world to World War III. Now, because the GCC and BRICS aligned, they got more strategic power and they got more aligned with BlackRock in 2022. And then there was the de-dollarization shift. So Saudi used its sovereign wealth and influence in order to say, let's regime change Biden and let's create an event that will completely redistribute capital. And we want to be in a region of peace, and we want to strategically weaken Israel and regime change Israel. And so that is what's being executed right now. So Trump, basically they said, all right, let's take away the lawfare, let's do a couple of assassination attempts, and let's allow Trump to invest and put twin towers up in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE. And China said, we'll give you an ICBC, the largest bank loan. And now you need to execute this strategy. And so the military is trying to squeeze as much profits out of the Middle East, give as much strategic power. So Trump gave 12 billion to Israel. And now they're getting as much land grab as they can while they negotiate between the essentially regime change within Israel and Saudi Arabia. And Trump is getting as much deals as he can in the Middle East. And so they're all going to go to the Middle East next week and they're going to negotiate exactly what it looks like. And, it's a fluid situation. But Trump represents the bank, Netanyahu represents the military, and the GCC represent a vision for peace in the Middle East rather than continually allowing the military to make trillions in war. And so then,
But how does that all settle? Like they meet in Davos and they're all on the same team ostensibly, and they go, well, we want to go this way with Biden. No, we want to stick with Trump. Well, let's see how it works out. Good luck, guys. We'll see you next year.
well, I
Is
don't
that
think we'll fully ever know those answers, but there are a series of meetings, and they're connected, through Bank for International Settlement shareholders in central banks, and then you've got all these different agendas. Like, you can see the agenda in Europe, right? Right? It was switch off nuclear, push the renewable energy narrative, escalate NATO, aggravate Russia, and then tell the world that they're fighting for democracy and kill Europe. Like, those strategies are based upon, firstly, who is the shareholders in all the banks now? So it used to be all the banking dynasties, the Rothschild families. They slowly sold their shares off over time as they went public. So Goldman Sachs securitized them. And then the money managers became the next power base because they were creating ETFs and allocating all of the capital. And so BlackRock, who's also a shareholder in Vanguard and State Street and every single bank, created a network where they can move the most amount of capital, and their power is represented by how many trillions they have under management. They buy politicians, they control the political process, they decide who's in charge, they set the agendas, and then they say to all of their companies, you'll get access to this capital, but here's the new direction that we'd like it to go. And there's a constant struggle based upon
DEI,
capital.
things like that?
Yeah. And remember, BlackRock's technology, Aladdin, is used by every fund manager in the world. It's used by the US Treasury for fiscal policy. It's used by the Fed for monetary policy. It's used by every central bank. It's used by every single money manager. So they've got the largest algorithm in AI where they can essentially pull the strings in terms of a communication strategy to all the different forms of capital. This is where it power is measured by assets under administration, and they are significant. As long as you can securitize and financialize an economy, then they can create war in order to own all the assets, and that's how it's coordinated. So they're working on India as their next target right now, and they're working on Ukraine was their last target. and they kind of move, and sometimes they're on the same team, sometimes they're in the opposite team. But Trump definitely represents the banks and the technocrats. He doesn't represent military.
When you say when you say India, you mean like a conflict that's going to be manufactured between India and Pakistan?
Yeah, so BlackRock wants multipolarity as a strategy. That's what they've decided the next few decades look like, in my belief, from following the money. Then what they say is, right, how do we get strategic? So Saudi has a lot of the power right now. And we're going to do the strategy with US through tariffs. And then Saudi's going to do tons of foreign direct investment into US technology. When you do foreign direct investment, you're essentially asset stripping the country and giving the returns to a foreign control. And so when you invest in a country, you get the control. That's the IMF model. So Trump is kind of strategically negotiating the selling off of all the assets of all the ports to BlackRock right now, and Apple and various other companies. So every deal that's being announced is selling another American asset to foreign control. That's what we're experiencing right now. That's what these deals mean. Um, and so, sorry, what was the question again, Puncher? I went off.
No, I guess we'll get to Jesse. He's had his hand
Yeah.
up forever. But how does this get coordinated at the highest levels with all this friction? But you answered
Yeah.
the question. I mean, it's not like, okay, you're going to do this, we're going to do that, we'll meet here next month. It's kind of like things play out. There's winners and losers within
Yeah,
the
and
structure, and
your
then
strategies sometimes go wrong and right. But remember, they can also they hedge all their strategies. Think of it like one ginormous corporation with BlackRock as the CEO. It's a bit more, complex than that. But
yeah, there's power struggles
and then
inside the
they'll go
corporation.
wage a war, and then they'll say, right, here's the investments. We'll fund both sides. Here's the securitization strategy. If we can take over India, then we can have a financial market in India. They can become the next growth, which leads to massive wealth confiscation and transfer over to the wealthy institutions. And we can control the country, we can vassalize it, and we can control the political process. We can asset strip it over time, and then that gives us more influence within the BRICS corridor. And so what you do is you agitate, you fund a militia within Pakistan, you then weaponize the media, and then you get to fight a battle. But if it goes wrong, you short the stock anyway. So you make money out of every direction. So they can borrow from Bank of Japan for free. They can hedge out the risk with a carry trade derivative, and then they can get the hedge funds in order to short their trade, so that whichever direction it goes, military, financial, or the strategy goes wrong, they end up with more and more assets under management. But it's like imagine you're a trader where you can significantly control the outcome to like an 80% accuracy. That's the game they're playing, and it all hinders upon the controlling of the money press and having a debt-based Ponzi scheme where banks can create the money every time they issue a loan.
I'm thoroughly depressed at this point. Jesse.
Punch, I'm gonna try to make you feel better. I have a philosophical, sociological take, and I see Tomer's down there. Maybe I always think of him because he's so philosophical as well. But first of all, amazing conversation, guys. I've been listening, and it's just, I think this is one of the top conversations in a while. Dark, I didn't get to come in. I was on calls, so I missed the whole. Is it Josh? What's his full name? Mandel? Who is it?
Josh Mandel,
Yeah,
yeah.
Josh Mandel. I'm gonna listen to the recording as soon as we close this out because I missed that part. But even after he was gone, it's right when I came in, and it's been phenomenal. So thank you guys as always. So philosophical take, I think what everyone's been talking about, there's a lot of people that listen to these rooms, and just thinking about the regular people, Going back to what Dark said earlier about the police not turning on the people there in his town, I think that's really profound, and I think that that's really what we're talking about when you go all the way up the ladder, all the way up to the stuff that Simon talks about, which is this taking over the world geopolitical chess match that all these jerks are basically playing. And look, some of them might have good intentions, some might not. We can debate that. We can debate all day, where things are going to go. But I think if you just zoom out and look at it from a sociological perspective, you realize that centralized power, you just think about the energy, all the energy is flowing to those folks at the top of that centralized power chain. That means less energy for people at the bottom. So just equate that to the rich and the poor. So the more centralized we get, the more of an enslaved, poor world we become, the few and the many. The more decentralized we get, the more that balances out. The energy balances, and everyone gets to an abundant level of value. And essentially, Bitcoin is the only rails that humanity has ever had that can enable that to happen without human intervention, which is the invention. That's the magic. It happens without anybody, without any human. So therefore, it cannot become centralized by design. Literally, the energy force of Bitcoin forces against that. And let me give you a person-to-person example. No matter what games the rich guys play, no matter what Trump's thinking or Putin's thinking or doing, I can create a beautiful necklace and I can sell it to somebody in across the world somewhere, in another country, in another place, on an island. I can sell it to somebody in Tahiti who likes my necklace, and they can buy it from me with Bitcoin. Nobody can stop that. No government, no other source can stop me from trading that art, that value, that energy that I created with someone else for another exchangeable value, Bitcoin, which then I can go use to buy something down the street, to buy groceries. And nobody can reduce the value of my Bitcoin, and there's a fixed supply of Bitcoin. So what it means is we can go back to global scalable tribes, mini communities that can operate where I can get bread, I can buy my stuff just by creating necklaces without giving a shit what Trump or Putin or any leader is doing. And that's the magic of Bitcoin. So the only key to understand is that you need to get and hold your Bitcoin. That's what, Simon and all the other folks up here will agree with me that self-custody is the key, because that's the only way to get out of this game. So I'll land the plan there. I love the conversation today. And I think the game theory, if you really understand game theory, you can kind of see the future here. And I think Bitcoin is the solution.
Well, now I'm not as depressed. Thanks, Jesse. Hey, Dark Side, I'm going about an hour longer than normal. What do you want to do, bud? You want to go around the horn?
Yeah, sure. We can go around the horn and wrap it up. It's been an awesome space. I mean, I think this is
Fabulous.
one of my best and one of our best, Poncho.
Yeah, for sure.
I really
Let's
enjoyed it.
let's go with Dog Said.
Yeah, hey
Close it.
guys. Yeah, look, I mean, all I really want to say is, Bitcoin is a low type preference, high quality investment that takes time in order for you to understand it. And one of the things that I mean, it's been for me 4 years, and I kid you not, I probably spend 5 to 7 hours a day, outside of my daily fiat job, just trying to really learn all the components. And now I'm going to be running my own node. And now uh, this whole like engineering talk and code and op returns and all this new lingo. I think you said it, Puncher, the other day where you were saying when I think one of your peers asked you about, hey, what's up with this Bitcoin thing? Talk to me about it. And you said, hey, listen, let's spend some time, preferably an afternoon, and I'll tell you about it, because if I tell you in 5 minutes, you're not going to understand anything. And even for me, after 4 years and close to 8,000 hours of Bitcoin knowledge, dude, I still don't know a lot of stuff. So I guess with that, I just share, stay humble, stay focused in the prize, and that is to continue accumulating as much as you can. Try not to do leverage or borrow against your Bitcoin, because what I'm seeing right now, I forgot who it was earlier that said something about Luna. Man, I was a big investor in Luna, and I got my ass handed to me. And one of the things that I think is, it's kind of negative in some sense, but like all these, Wall Street firms, these lending institutions that are starting to get creative to kind of part you from your Bitcoin. I think that's going to create like a cascade of negative effects, because then you know people are going to say, oh well, if it's Wall Street, then there's no problem, and then they're going to lever up your coin, and they're going to borrow against your borrow. All of a sudden, like the whole house of cards falls. So try not to do that. Just keep stacking, learn about um, uh, uh, cold custody, cold storage, and stay focused. Thanks, guys. You guys are the best, man.
That's right, Doug said. And you can spend that extra time because when your money works for you, I mean, a lot of people understand this intuitively. If I'm a carpenter, I've got to spend half my time as a carpenter, and then when I make fiat in a debt-based Ponzi scheme, I have to figure out how to keep that money and how to become an investor and learn about all kinds of stocks, bonds, and what's going to give a yield. So time is the real asset here. And with Bitcoin, not only are you going to have more time because your money's working for you instead of against you, but you can do the things that you truly love. You can live your highest and best life, which a lot of people aren't doing. They're slaving away like Lucille Ball at the chocolate factory, and that's just sad. Let's go to let's see, Puppy down there, but we're wrapping up. Let's go, Jesse. You got anything else? You kind of went last, Jess.
No, man, I'm good. I'm just loving listening, man. Amazing panel today. Just epic.
Yeah, a lot of super smart people jumping in. Omar, what do you got, buddy?
Yeah, great space today. I think my last words for today, we talked about BRICS, and that's a subject that I love to discuss. I think the world is showing us right now that the geopolitical equations throughout the world are changing. We're seeing a huge change in balance of power. The big guys are knocking on Bitcoin's door. I think that we need to be very cautious because that same world that's getting more and more hectic is trying to divide us. Bitcoin is here to unite us and keep us united. And how much Bitcoin you have is going to determine where you sit at the table. Maybe not 5 years from now, but in the long term. So be smart and don't let these markets wear you out and give you the impression that we're going south or that it's the end of it all. It's not. You know what you own. Keep reading about Bitcoin, keep studying it, and keep coming to these spaces because that's what's gonna keep you grounded.
Awesome, Omar. Thanks. Orange Pill Sky. Let you up because we're wrapping up. But what do you got, buddy?
Thanks. Real quick, I missed the first portion, so I'm going to have to go back. So maybe you discussed it, but I'm most concerned about timing, about when all the bad stuff that could happen with, because I have most, like 90% of my Bitcoin holdings in MicroStrategies and the ETFs. I'm waiting for in-kind transfers if and when that ever happens. I don't know why BlackRock would ever do it. And I'll swap everything back into cold storage with the 10% that I have in cold storage, but to increase that eventually to 100%. But I'm wondering how much time. I mean, how much saturation do you think needs to happen, Simon? Right now, they control like 5% between them, or 10% mostly through the ETFs and everything. Do you think it has to get to 20%, 30%? I mean, when are they going to pull the trigger on such a nefarious opportunity for them? That's all I'm wondering.
I mean, I'll answer and summarize it into a closing comment as well. But I would never be able to guess when they're going to do it. I could put a few theories out there. And my theories would be if I were to do this, I'd wait until an organization like Cantor Fitzgerald has got, um, you know, billions and billions and billions of loans issued with, based upon people's Bitcoin. and I'd look for the maximum leverage. And I'd do it under the Trump administration. And so that's how I would think if I were trying to execute something like this.
And they also have huge capital gains that it's going to be crushing if and when I do
that
all this
that
swap.
that was one of the issues, by the way. The worst part about the Celsius bankruptcy was the tax liabilities on top of the losses. But anyway, look, you know, how can I summarize this into something? Look, we have a couple of choices, right? One is we could just be positive and say ignorance is bliss, and then just get caught with our pants down, or we could say I'm going to invest time into trying to figure out an immense amount of very complex things and turn up here every day and learn from people and crowdsource information and get smarter every day. But there's one universal truth, and that is that if you own more Bitcoin this month than last month, and you spend as much of your time actually working to get as much Bitcoin as possible, and you have a strategy that works through a centralized mechanism and a decentralized mechanism. So even if you've got your whole exposure in like this ETF, Mastercoin, MicroStrategy, all of that stuff, ask yourself the question: if that all blows up, where am I left? And do I need to hedge? And maybe I get 50% in self custody, 50% in my pension, tax deferred, and all that type of stuff. Just start to think about those questions. But I think just have a strategy of, let's imagine all of the stuff I've got at my brokerage with other people in the middle. Imagine if all that disappeared, what would my life look like? And then answer that question when you're allocating how much to self custody, and recognize, yeah, there are tax benefits, but what if the tax benefit ends up where I lose everything? Maybe I just need somewhere I own that I'm never going to sell, and it's in a Trezor wallet or whatever your initial setup is. Like, just start thinking about that now, because now's the time to think about it. It's not later, and maybe just split across your two different worlds. I think that's the best advice I can give you. It may never happen, but be prepared for it. I think it is going to happen.
It's good advice. Outside time frame I took from that is about 3.25 years. Cosmo, I didn't even see you sneak up, bud. How you doing?
Yeah, doing good. I feel like I missed a great killer space when I had to come in. I was gutted. I had a couple calls this morning, so bummed I couldn't jump in. But great conversation. I've been thinking a lot about productivity versus growth the last few days. We talked about that last week in reference to Larry Lepard's book. But I'm excited for Bitcoin to gain a lot of steam and for Bitcoin to change the minds of a lot of people like it has changed ours and see the modern business and financial structure kind of look more towards being more productive instead of just growing, right? Because I think those terms are super different. But yeah, killer space, you guys. It was a good chat.
Awesome, bud. Now we've got parenthetical Matt jumping in, Matt, and then we'll go to non-parenthetical Matt.
Are y'all winding down? It sounds like you are.
Yeah, we're an hour over. Dark can go for 16 hours straight, but
Well,
we're
bummer. Sorry I missed y'all
trying to keep it.
today. Got tied up with work stuff and realized it was already 2:30 p.m. and I was like, man, I gotta hop over there and see what's going on. And now y'all are turning it off. So sad. Hopefully I'll hit one of the other ones this week.
Outside, it was a good one, worth a re-listen. Matt, what do you got, buddy?
They can't unprint all the money they printed. They can't, in a neat way, unstack all the stacked bets that they have that they claim are offsetting from each other, but are one, that are unknowable, so they can't know that they're offsetting, and two, there's all sorts of delivery problems that they're going to walk themselves into across lots of different markets, gold and other ones. And then we even have virtualization and hypothecation and gray markets and shadow markets in real estate. So there's a lot of fiat madness going on, and Bitcoin is the solution to that because it's algorithmically insensitive to the demand. It's hard. It's getting harder. It's portable. It's discrete. It's gold on steroids. And every single day when the central banks are printing money, they're deleting value from fiat, but they're adding value to Bitcoin because it's absolutely scarce and it won't be discovered again. So that's why I'm here. That's why I love Bitcoin. And I hope everyone has a great week ahead.
Yeah, you too, Matt. And I'll just say before I turn it over to Dark, the ability to be able to sit and listen to subject matter experts at the top of their field and just kind of listen in and then ask questions. And I mean, it's an amazing capability, the mind meld that happens on these spaces. And I'm just so thankful. And I know there's other people out there who don't want to listen up. And I apologize for the folks we couldn't get on. We had a full house pretty much all morning on the speaker stage. But keep requesting to speak because there's lots of dark sides and Matts and Simons out there that we never hear from in different subject matters. And as they come up, everybody gets smarter. So with that, I'll turn it over to Darkside.
Thanks, Puncher. Great space today. Thanks for the kind words. But yeah, look, I learned more on these spaces than anywhere else, man. It's just incredible to listen to some of the brightest minds, like you said, domain expertise. Um, yeah, when I get around people with domain expertise, I try to shut up and listen because it's just amazing. Guys like Josh Mandel that have been through just crazy, crazy TradFi experiences at Solomon, at Caxton, guys like Simon that have fought the wars, man. It's absolutely incredible to listen to them. So I'm tremendously grateful that I'm able to participate in these. And look, thank you everybody for coming. We'll do it again tomorrow, 8:30 Pacific, 11:30 Eastern. I guess Lauren, I think, is hosting tomorrow, and join Bitcoin Today. Thank you so much.
We'll see you in a little bit, Dark. I know you're not gone for the day.
See you
Oh yeah,
guys.
no, I'm just getting started. It's early. It's early.
Exactly. I'll be there.
This is an hors d'oeuvre
Yeah, hors
for
d'oeuvres, hors
Darkside.
d'oeuvres. All right, everybody, have an awesome
See
day,
you
and
guys.
thank you so much for coming. Later.
Later.